Daenerys Stormborn of the House Targaryen stood on the ramparts of Dragonstone, her silver-gold hair whipping behind her in the cold sea wind. Long had she believed she knew the destiny the gods had ordained for her, reclaiming the Iron Throne, freeing enslaved nations, and uniting the 7 kingdoms under her banner. But even for the Mother of Dragons, fate still held secrets. She gazed out at the shimmering sea, the taste of salt on her lips, remembering when she had first walked into the pyre to hatch the 3 eggs she believed were the last of their kind. Drogon, regal and cunning. Regal, watchful and fierce. Viserion, gentle yet powerful. From that conflagration, Daenerys emerged unburnt, her 3 newly hatched children screeching into the night sky. For so long, she had believed there were no more Targaryen dragons left to save, no living eggs beyond the ones she had awakened. She had been wrong. Under the hidden caverns beneath Dragonstone, in a dark, sea-worn chamber seldom visited by any of her advisors, she had felt an inexplicable pull, a whisper that reached out to the blood of old Valyria coursing through her veins. In those shadowy depths, buried beneath layers of rubble, barnacles, and remnants of collapsed stone, something awaited. She had stumbled upon a half-buried relic, another dragon egg, its surface black as obsidian with faint swirls of gold. She remembered how her breath caught in her throat, how her heart raced to see that swirling pattern almost breathe with an inner glow. At first, she thought it might be a trick of the torchlight, but it had grown warm to her touch. It was alive. She kept the discovery secret. Not even Tyrion Lannister, her hand, nor Missandei, her most trusted confidant, knew of the egg's existence. A part of her whispered that this was a blessing, a sign that the gods had plans for her that exceeded all mortal designs. Another part warned that such a secret could poison alliances. Knowledge, she had learned, was a form of power, and in Westeros, power could be the swiftest path to danger. She told no one, not even Jorah Mormont, who had proven his loyalty time and again. This 4th egg was hers and hers alone. In the months that followed her crowning as queen in the north after defeating the army of the dead, a unity forced by the greatest threat mankind had ever faced, Daenerys slipped away from her retinue whenever she could. Within a hidden chamber accessible only through a narrow tunnel, she built a small fire in a blackened pit, feeding it with driftwood soaked in oil. She had learned from the 3 eggs long ago. Dragon eggs required intense heat. Magic was part of it, true, but certain conditions had to be met for new life to spark. She recalled the ritual of her first dragon's birth. The screams of Mirri Maz Duur, the acrid scent of hair and flesh burning, the swirling smoke and embers that had danced around her. This time, she would not rely on the blood of innocents or the conspiracies of warlocks. She turned to her own memory, her own unburned blood, to guide the process. The black egg glimmered in the firelight, and Daenerys sang Valyrian lullabies to it in hushed tones, prayers that only a Targaryen might know by heart. Each night, she returned to it, pressing her palm to its warm surface, feeling the faint pulse as if something within were stirring. The days turned colder outside, but inside this hidden chamber, the heat grew ever more intense. The oil-slicked walls flickered with orange shadows, and her songs took on a quiet desperation. This was dangerous, a secret that might be discovered if any of her guards heard that haunting melody echo in the stone passages at night. Yet no one knew. In the mornings, she would emerge with exhaustion etched into her features. Tyrion would ask if she was sleeping well, Missandei would offer her calm presence, Grey Worm would nod in his silent way, but none pressed her. She was the queen, after all, and queens could harbor secrets so long as their armies were fed, their dragons soared overhead, and their judgments were just. And then, one fateful evening, after her hushed lullabies had ended and the fire was dying down to embers, she felt something. Not just a pulse or warmth from within the shell, but movement. A tremor. A crackling whisper. Daenerys held her breath, heart pounding, as faint lines of light appeared across the black shell. Thin, spiderweb-like fractures snaked outward, glowing with the color of molten gold. She could barely breathe, scarcely believe what she witnessed. And then came the keening cry, a tiny screech that made her entire body shudder with the memory of standing in Drogo's pyre, naked and unburnt, 3 newborn dragons coiling around her. The shell shattered in places, and out from the smoking remains crawled a creature so small, so fragile-looking that tears filled Daenerys' eyes. Black and gold scales, shining with the radiance of fresh-forged steel. The hatchling's wings looked almost translucent, veins of gold running across the thin membrane while its eyes glowed like living coals. And it looked at her as though it recognized the blood in her veins, as though it knew from the first breath who its mother was. She reached out, trembling, and let the newborn dragon press its snout into her hand. The creature's scales were hot, scorching to the touch, but her palm remained unburned. Somberion, she whispered, the name forming without hesitation on her lips. She felt as if the old tongues of Valyria guided her, as if the collective history of House Targaryen breathed into her. You are a child of darkness and light. The name felt right, resonant, capturing the black and gold swirl of the shell and the hush of the night that had cloaked its birth. The hatchling blinked at her once, then screeched, a shrill, hungry sound. Daenerys brought forth a small platter with strips of raw lamb she had brought for exactly this moment. She offered a morsel. Somberion snapped at it with needle-sharp teeth, devouring it in a flurry of small crackles of flame and smoke. The next hours stretched on in breathless awe. Daenerys nurtured the new dragon, feeding it slivers of meat until its hunger finally abated. Even in those first few hours of life, she saw the fierce intelligence in its gaze. It was not just an animal. Dragons never were. They were living extensions of the Targaryen will, creatures bound to those with the blood of old Valyria. With each bite, Daenerys felt the bond growing, a tether that wound its way between their souls. Her mind drifted to Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, the triumphant surge she had felt as she soared over deserts and seas. Now there was another child, one whose power was unknown, untested, with no one else aware of its existence. At dawn, Daenerys wrapped Somberion in a thick cloak and smuggled the hatchling out of the chamber. The fires were extinguished, the chamber swept, the entrance concealed so none would suspect. She stole back to her private apartments, her mind racing with all the implications. She must keep Somberion's secret until she understood how best to protect her newest child. She had witnessed the vulnerability of dragons under threat, Qyburn's scorpions, the cunning of Euron Greyjoy, the spears of the sons of the Harpy. Despite their majesty, dragons were not invulnerable. And a newly hatched creature was even more fragile, a target for any who dared undermine the Targaryen queen. Somberion settled in her chambers, hidden by shadows and curtains. By the time Daenerys strode into the great hall of Dragonstone to hear her advisors, only the slightest quiver in her voice betrayed her excitement. Tyrion delivered reports of the lords of Westeros who had bent the knee, of the few holdouts who still bristled at Targaryen rule. Missandei listed the trade routes that needed securing, especially now that winter's harshness still weighed heavily on the realm. The lords and knights in her presence did not suspect she was hiding a living dragon in her private room. Not one soul guessed that their queen had brought something entirely new and perhaps dangerous into the world. In the solitude of the night, she would return to Somberion, studying its every motion. Sometimes the hatchling would stare at her with an intensity that made Daenerys uneasy, as though it saw something deep within her. She recognized that look. Drogon's had grown more restless after the fall of Viserion, as though sensing the rage and loss in her heart. Could Somberion sense her unresolved grief, the guilt that simmered beneath her pride? Daenerys wondered if this child might symbolize a new beginning, a chance to correct past mistakes. Perhaps the fourth dragon's birth would herald a better reign, a more just rule, or a more calculated approach to war. She would not squander this gift. But secrets have a way of curdling in the dark. The world weighed heavily upon her. The armies of Westeros demanded her attention. The lords whispered behind closed doors about succession, about loyalty, about the Targaryen history of madness. She felt the burden of her father's shadow, of her own recent struggles. For a time, it was enough just to slip away and feed Somberion by candlelight, to whisper lullabies in the old Valyrian tongue, to stroke the hatchling's shimmering scales and dream of a day when it might soar beside Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion. But every time she considered revealing Somberion to those closest to her, a cold dread seized her heart. She recalled the 1,000 betrayals she had endured, the endless political games. She was tired of threats to her children. This time she would protect her dragon with the utmost ferocity, and if that meant deception, so be it. Weeks passed. Somberion grew swiftly, as all dragons do when nurtured by the power of their environment. Daenerys took to letting the hatchling roam her private chambers, always ensuring the curtains remained drawn and the doors locked. She worried about the day when Somberion would become too large to hide. Drogon had grown monstrous by the time she reached Meereen, and even Rhaegal and Viserion were formidable. Still, she clung to the hope that there would be a moment, a perfect unveiling, when she could demonstrate to the realm the awe-inspiring reality of a fourth dragon under her command. And if the realm feared it, then so be it. Fear could be harnessed. But fear was an unpredictable beast. That knowledge gnawed at her. She had felt it in the tensions across the 7 kingdoms, lords who tolerated her only because she had dragons, small folk who whispered of her brother's madness, sparrows who questioned the righteousness of her claim. As winter loosened its grip, rumors spread through Westeros of the queen's nightly walks, of candlelight burning in her chambers until the early hours. Some of her advisors fretted that the war had taken too heavy a toll, that she was haunted by specters of the past. Others feared she planned fresh conquests. The truth was more complex, more fragile. She was tending to a new life, a bond that ran deeper than any vow of fealty or parchment of alliance. One early morning, when the sky had just turned a pale shade of lavender, Daenerys sat on the cold stone floor beside Somberion, watching the hatchling gnaw on a roasted goat leg. The entire castle was asleep, no footsteps in the halls, no prying eyes at her door. She realized then that hiding Somberion forever was impossible. The day would come when the young dragon needed the open sky. Dragons were meant to roam free, not remain cloistered. She could almost feel the longing in Somberion's expression. He flapped his tiny wings, knocking a candle from the low table. She snatched the flame before it could catch on the rug, and she saw how the flickering light played on his growing wingspan. His gold-veined membranes glistened as if harnessing the very firelight. A wave of sadness swept over her. To keep him secret was to clip his wings before he had a chance to fly. Yet if she unveiled him too soon, her enemies might see him as a threat to be extinguished. Even her allies might balk at the idea of another weapon in her arsenal. She thought of Jon Snow, the man who had once commanded her heart, who had grown distant in the aftermath of discovering his own Targaryen blood. Would he stand by her if he knew she had kept such a secret from him? She was the mother of dragons, after all, but she was also a queen in a land that did not easily accept outsiders. Somberion gazed at her with those coal-red eyes, as though urging her to make a choice. She stroked the soft ridges of his neck, remembering the scorched earth outside King's Landing, the charred remains of Euron's fleet, and the screams echoing in her memory. She vowed silently that this dragon's presence would not herald destruction. She had earned every scar on her soul and body, and she would build a better future for her people. Let this secret be a path to redemption rather than a tool of wrath. But no vow is made in a vacuum, and the realm had a way of twisting even the noblest intentions. It began with a stray rumor. One day, as she sat with Tyrion, discussing shipments of grain and the possibility of opening new trade routes to Pentos, he brought it up. "Your Grace," Tyrion began, eyeing her carefully, "there has been a rumor. Something about strange noises in the night coming from beneath your quarters. Whispers of flames and flickering shadows." He tried to make it sound casual, but Daenerys knew Tyrion too well. His curiosity was piqued. "Is there anything you'd like to share?" She feigned ignorance with a small smile. "Perhaps rats in the walls. Or the wind through the old tunnels." Tyrion tilted his head, studying her with those keen mismatched eyes. "Perhaps," he said softly, leaving the question hanging in the air. She felt the tension coil inside her. For Tyrion, one rumor was enough to set him on a path of discovery. If he suspected something, it was only a matter of time before he uncovered at least part of the truth. She would have to be more careful than ever. That very night, she decided to move Somberion from her chambers to the hidden cavern again. The hatchling had grown more restless, and each day, the risk of being discovered became greater. Daenerys prepared for the relocation in the middle of the night. She scooped Somberion into her arms, though he was larger now, reaching half her height when he reared up and shushed his soft snarls. The corridors were silent, the torches sputtering. She knew the route by heart, weaving through unused passages down a spiral stair of cold stone. She had almost reached the secret chamber when footsteps echoed behind her. She froze, heart pounding. She quickly ducked into a shadowy alcove, pressing Somberion's wriggling form against her chest. The footsteps grew louder. She held her breath, praying to every god that the darkness would conceal her. She dared not think of the consequences if she were found. The risk to Somberion would be too great, and the repercussions on her rule could be catastrophic. She braced herself. The footsteps passed. A guard on a routine patrol, or perhaps someone unable to sleep. The presence did not linger. Daenerys waited an agonizing moment longer, then slipped back into motion. She reached the chamber's entrance, an unremarkable iron door hidden behind a decaying tapestry. With trembling haste, she let herself in. She locked it from within, exhaling a long breath. By the faint torchlight in the chamber, she looked down at Somberion's glowing eyes. The dragon blinked slowly, as if unimpressed by the danger they had just skirted. Relief mingled with the lingering dread. She placed him on the rocky ground, letting him explore. The dragon sniffed at the fire pit, clicked his jaws, and peered up at her expectantly. Daenerys retrieved the flint and steel from a small shelf and sparked a fire in the pit, placing fresh logs she had prepared. She watched the flames rise, dancing across Somberion's black and gold scales. He seemed to revel in the fire, opening his wings to soak in the heat. A flicker of pride warmed Daenerys' chest. This was her child, and she would do everything in her power to keep him safe. In the glow of the growing flames, she realized how large Somberion had become in such a short span. His neck was more muscular, his claws sharper, his hiss deeper. Soon, she would have to decide on a new hiding place or reveal his existence. She thought of Drogon roosting in the sky, the swirl of black wings overhead. A secret dragon could shift the balance of power in Westeros, but it could also unravel every alliance she had painstakingly built. She settled down on a stone ledge, the flickering light casting dancing shadows on the walls. Somberion nudged her, seeking food or affection. She offered both. As he tore into raw goat flesh, Daenerys tried to imagine how the lords of Westeros would react if they saw a new dragon at her side. Fear, awe, hatred, devotion. She had seen it all before, only this time it would be magnified. The Targaryens were already a legend. Another dragon might cement her claim or drive her enemies into a frenzy to destroy her once and for all. So she made a decision in that silent chamber, the heat of the fire reflecting in her eyes. She would raise Somberion until the day came when she could use his might to protect what was hers. She would not allow the realm or her enemies to steal this gift from her. Secrecy would remain her shield, at least for now. But she would confide in someone she trusted implicitly, someone who could guard her secret as fiercely as she did. The weight of it was too heavy to bear alone. As she returned to her chambers before dawn's light could betray her absence, Daenerys' thoughts drifted to Missandei, the gentle woman who had stood by her from the days of slavery in Astapor to the fields of winter in Westeros. Missandei was discreet, loyal beyond question. She had never once broken Daenerys' confidence. Perhaps she would be the one to share this secret to help ensure Somberion was cared for if anything happened to Daenerys. The mere notion of her own mortality sent a shiver through her, but she could not ignore the dangers surrounding her at every turn. As queen, she was not guaranteed another day, let alone a lifetime. And so, the next evening, when the castle's bustle had quieted and the sunset bled across the sky, Daenerys summoned Missandei to her private library. The young Na'vi woman entered gracefully, her dark curls framing her observant eyes. "Your Grace," she said softly, inclining her head. Daenerys gently touched Missandei's arm, urging her to abandon formalities. "My friend," she said, her voice thick with unspoken emotion, "I have something to show you. But you must swear, on our bond, on your life, that you will never speak of it to another soul. Not Tyrion. Not Grey Worm. No one." Missandei glanced up, reading the seriousness etched in Daenerys' features. She gave a small nod. "I swear it, Daenerys." They lit only one lantern, hooded so the flame's glow was minimal. Daenerys led her through winding corridors, down the stone steps, past the tapestry until they reached the hidden chamber. She could feel the tension radiating off Missandei, sense her curiosity and concern. When they pushed open the iron door, the warmth and flicker of a newly lit fire greeted them. And in the center, coiled atop a pile of furs, lay Somberion. He lifted his head at their entrance, eyes glinting, wings tensing in caution. Missandei gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "A dragon," she breathed. "Another dragon." Daenerys knelt beside Somberion, gesturing for Missandei to approach carefully. The hatchling huffed a small puff of smoke, but made no move to attack. Cautiously, Missandei inched closer, her eyes wide with wonder and a trace of fear. "How, when?" Daenerys let her fingertips trail over Somberion's scaled brow. "I found his egg here in the bowels of Dragonstone. I hatched him in secrecy over the course of months. No one else knows." Missandei exhaled shakily. "Your Grace, I'm honored you would trust me with this. But why keep him a secret?" Daenerys studied the glowing eyes of her hatchling. "Because the realm has not learned how to embrace dragons without fear and violence. Because I've seen what men will do to kill or control them. Somberion is too young, too vulnerable. If my enemies knew, they would move against him before he could grow strong. Even some of my allies might question the wisdom of another dragon. Missandei nodded, comprehension and empathy shining in her eyes. I understand. Thank you for sharing this with me. I will keep your secret, always. Relief flooded Daenerys, and she allowed a small, genuine smile. Thank you, Missandei. Your loyalty is everything to me. She let the words hang there, carrying a warmth more genuine than any vow of fealty from a lord. The two women spent the next hour tending to Somberion, speaking in hushed voices about feeding schedules, the size of the chamber, the risk of detection. Missandei noted that the pit would need new ventilation soon, or the buildup of smoke would be noticeable. She offered to discreetly arrange for repairs under the guise of standard maintenance. Daenerys marveled at how swiftly her friend grasped the complexities. The tension in her own heart loosened a fraction, knowing she was no longer alone in this burden. Their time together was cut short, however, by the swift approach of footsteps in the corridor. Daenerys froze once again, her breath catching. She exchanged a glance with Missandei, who carefully doused the torch, plunging the room into near darkness. The footsteps paused near the tapestry, and Daenerys clenched her fists. Had someone followed them? Was it Tyrion or some other inquisitive soul? The tension was suffocating. But then, the footsteps receded, and silence settled once more. They stayed in darkness for a time, hearts pounding. Finally, Daenerys whispered, "We must be more cautious than ever." Somberion, sensing the tension, let out a soft hiss. Missandei reached out to gently calm him, her kind heart showing even in such perilous secrecy. As they left the chamber, Daenerys' mind churned with the possibilities. How long could she maintain this charade? Would Tyrion or others piece together enough rumors to confront her? And if so, how would she respond? The fourth dragon had hatched, a new symbol of House Targaryen's might and magic, but also a living, fragile creature who depended entirely on her. She could not allow this secret to be discovered prematurely. And yet Westeros's undercurrents of political scheming, the faint cracks in her alliances, and the ever-present watchfulness of her subjects made the secrecy as fragile as Somberion's hatchling wings. Still, hope burgeoned in her chest. She remembered the moment she had first tamed Drogon, felt the surge of wind beneath his wings, the fire in his roar. Now, a new flame burned quietly in the depths of Dragonstone, promising a future that might outshine her troubled past. And as long as Somberion survived and grew, Daenerys believed she might shape a better destiny for herself, for her people, and for the legacy of House Targaryen. Yet she could not ignore the truth: the world was rarely kind to those who bore power beyond mortal understanding. Eventually, the realm would come to know of the fourth dragon. When that day came, Daenerys vowed she would be ready. Over the next fortnight, Daenerys redoubled her efforts to keep Somberion well-fed and hidden. With Missandei's help, she managed to smuggle fresh meat into the cavern without raising suspicion. The young dragon devoured it with a voracious appetite, seeming to grow stronger and more agile by the day. Already, his wings extended far enough to stir gusts of wind in the enclosed space, scattering embers whenever he hopped in excitement. If not for Daenerys' careful watch, he might have toppled an entire brazier and lit the chamber ablaze. Yet each time Daenerys witnessed Somberion's incredible growth, her heart soared. The bond she felt with him went beyond mere guardianship. It was as if their spirits were intertwined. At times, while presiding over her court, she would feel a strange pang of awareness, a sense of shared emotion that made her wonder if it was Somberion's hunger or restlessness she sensed. Although Drogon was her most powerful ally and mount, there was something intensely personal about secretly nurturing this newly hatched life away from prying eyes. In those moments, she remembered the hope she once carried like a banner, a hope for a reign defined not by fire and blood, but by compassion and resilience. Missandei stood by her throughout, ever discreet, ever compassionate. She designed an elaborate ruse to divert attention from the cavern. She requested certain repairs to the foundation walls in nearby corridors, ensuring that any unusual sounds would be attributed to workers' hammers or the clanging of metal scaffolding. She also managed to bribe a mason to seal off a useless passage, ensuring fewer curious guards ventured near the secret room. Tyrion, perceptive as he was, spent his days trying to pacify certain lords who fussed over titles and lineages, leaving him less time to wander the halls in search of hidden truths. For a while, Daenerys dared to believe that her secret remained secure. Still, doubts lingered on the edges of her consciousness. She knew the cost of secrets. She had suffered betrayals from men she thought she could trust. The memory of Varys's execution stung. He had been the spider, yes, but also a man whose loyalties once seemed genuine. How many steps away was she from kindling a similar fate for those who opposed her rule now? She did not want to become the very tyrant she had despised. That fear simmered whenever she looked at Somberion, remembering how easily a dragon's flame could turn cities to ash. One late afternoon, while gazing out to sea from the balcony of her chambers, Daenerys felt a surge of restlessness course through her as if it were her own. She hesitated, hand tightening on the stone balustrade. The day was calm, the gulls circling overhead, the waves lapping against Dragonstone's rocky shores. Yet her heart suddenly raced. She knew this sensation now. She had felt similar fleeting pulses from Drogon in the heat of battle. This had to be Somberion. Without a word to her attendants, Daenerys hurried down the spiral stair, cloak billowing behind her. She could hear her name carried on the wind by one of her guards, perhaps Grey Worm calling out, but she could not stop. Urgency guided her steps, the corridors twisting as she made for the hidden chamber. By the time she reached the tapestry, her breathing was uneven and a cold sweat clung to her brow. Missandei was already there, face pale, pressing her ear to the iron door. "What is it?" Daenerys asked in a tense whisper. "Something has frightened him," Missandei replied, her voice shaking. "He's been roaring, and there are loud crashes inside. I was on my way to find you." Daenerys wasted no time. She shoved the door open to a cacophony of tumbling stones and scraping claws. Somberion thrashed in the center of the chamber, tail lashing against the walls, wings half extended, eyes blazing with wild terror. His shrieks echoed in the confined space, each cry full of disoriented panic. Pieces of rubble littered the floor, dislodged from the ceiling by his violent movements. One brazier had already been knocked over, flames licking at the damp stones. "Somberion," Daenerys called out, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. She stepped carefully into the room, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "It's all right? I'm here." The dragon paused, chest heaving with rapid breaths, head swinging to fix those burning eyes on her. He let out a sharp hiss but didn't attack. Daenerys took another step, ignoring the jagged fragments of rock underfoot. "It's all right," she repeated, her tone soothing. She let the warmth in her heart flow outward, recalling how she used to calm Drogon with whispers in Valyrian. She reached out mentally, projecting reassurance as best she could. Slowly, the tension in Somberion's posture eased. He lowered his wings, though they still trembled. Daenerys moved closer and placed a hand on his scaled cheek. The heat was intense, but she was unburnt as always. She listened to his uneven breathing. Missandei cautiously approached, standing a respectful distance behind the queen, her hand over her mouth in concern. "What frightened him?" Daenerys asked softly, glancing at Missandei. "I don't know," Missandei whispered. He was calm one moment, then suddenly began thrashing as though something had attacked him. "There's been no one in here." Daenerys frowned. Could Somberion be reacting to something beyond this chamber? A disturbance in the castle, or perhaps some echo of her own emotions? A moment ago, she had been standing on the balcony, feeling the restless stir of his panic as if it were her own. "He sensed something," she murmured, stroking the dragon's neck. "Or perhaps he's dreaming. Dragons can be haunted by visions, or so the legends say." Somberion let out a softer whimper, pressing closer to Daenerys. She crouched beside him, murmuring reassurances. Missandei knelt, too, carefully avoiding his swinging tail. Together, they soothed him with gentle touches and low, steady voices. It took time, but eventually his breathing calmed, and the frantic gleam in his eyes subsided, replaced by the usual alert curiosity. Daenerys felt her heart clench. This was no mere pet. Dragons were creatures of magic and will, bound to Targaryens in ways that even she did not fully comprehend. She recalled the stories of ancient Valyria, of the dragon lords whose minds were said to link with their beasts in dream and waking. Perhaps Somberion had glimpsed some shadow in the future or sensed an approaching threat. If so, it meant their secrecy was under siege in more ways than one. "Can you stay with him for a while?" Daenerys asked Missandei, her voice soft. "I must attend to a meeting with Tyrion and the lords of the Crownlands, but I don't want to leave him alone in this state." Missandei nodded immediately. "Of course, Your Grace. I'll keep watch." "Thank you," Daenerys said, gratitude filling her chest. She rose, placed one last soothing palm on Somberion's head, then left. Even as she walked away, she felt the lingering bond, a faint pull of the dragon's consciousness that followed her steps. The notion both comforted and unnerved her. How much of her heart and mind was bound to each dragon she'd raised? How many secrets did they share that no mortal words could convey? Upon emerging from the secret passage, Daenerys composed herself, adjusting her posture to radiate regal assurance. She encountered Grey Worm in the corridor, who inquired if she was well. She only nodded, offering him a polite dismissal before making her way to the council chamber. Tyrion and several lords awaited her around a long table laden with maps and parchment. The conversation pivoted between trade policy, the holdings of houses still uncertain about her rule, and reports of lingering Ironborn raids on coastal villages. Daenerys forced her attention to each matter, though a portion of her mind lingered in the cavern below. She wondered if Somberion had truly calmed. She worried about the day he would grow too large to hide or too spirited to remain confined. Every question about the realm's stability seemed trivial when she thought about the precarious secret that could upend all her progress if discovered. "Your Grace," Tyrion said pointedly, drawing her back to the table. "Lord Valerion has offered you a naval escort for your travels to King's Landing next moon. He seeks assurances that his ships will be compensated for their time." She nodded, forcing her mind to refocus. "Tell him his loyalty will be rewarded. The crown needs strong allies at sea, especially if there are still pockets of trouble from the Ironborn." Her voice rang clear, and she sealed the matter with swift deliberation. Tyrion made a small note, though his sharp eyes flicked up briefly, searching her face for hints of distraction. Night fell, and Daenerys had not yet returned to the cavern. She found herself pacing in her private library, the dancing glow of candlelight casting flickering shapes on the walls. At intervals, she would pick up an old Valyrian text to read, then place it back down unread. Restlessness devoured her composure. Had Somberion settled? Was he dreaming again, haunted by glimpses of the unknown? Where did these dragons truly roam, in mind and spirit, when they closed their eyes? Finally, she could bear it no longer. She excused herself from her final meeting of the evening, ignoring Tyrion's puzzled expression, and hurried through the corridors to the secret chamber. She found Missandei sitting calmly on a stool, eyes half-lidded in the warm glow of a brazier. Somberion was curled beside her, breathing steadily. "He's been fine since you left," Missandei said, smiling gently. "He just needed comfort. It's remarkable, truly. He's unlike Drogon, Regal, or Viserion. He seems more attuned to emotions." Daenerys approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. He lifted his head, letting out a low rumble of greeting. "My sweet boy," Daenerys murmured, her tension easing. She knelt at his side, stroking the gleaming black scales across his shoulders. They were warm, but not scalding, and the gold filigree etched through them gleamed in the firelight. She realized his snout was pressed gently into her palm. It was a gesture almost of affection or reliance. "Has he eaten?" Daenerys asked, looking at Missandei. She nodded. "I fed him some goat earlier." He ate calmly and then dozed off. Daenerys glanced at the remains of the meal, bones stripped clean. Despite her earlier worry, she allowed herself a soft laugh of relief. Somberion was resilient. Perhaps the earlier episode was a fleeting nightmare. But a quiet voice in her mind asked if dragons' nightmares carried more weight than mortal dreams. She chose not to dwell on it for the moment. Time passed in the warm hush of the chamber. Missandei quietly departed, offering Daenerys a chance to be alone with her child. The queen sat against the rough stone wall, letting her cloak drape around her as Somberion rested his scaled head in her lap. It reminded her of a scene from years gone by, of Drogon's smaller frame curling up beside her in the red waste. She had been younger then, more hopeful, less burdened by the knowledge of loss and betrayal. Back then, she had believed she could save the entire world with pure will and the might of her dragons. Now, she knew the world was more complicated, more dangerous. Each victory claimed a piece of her, each betrayal hardened her resolve. And still, she clung to her vow she would never again be powerless. Somberion was proof that she remained the mother of dragons, that her house's ancient magic had not run thin. With him, she felt renewal. She closed her eyes and drifted into a half-sleep, lulled by the gentle rumble of his breathing. She did not know how long she dozed, but the sputter of the brazier pulled her from her light slumber. Somberion's head still lay in her lap, his eyes closed. The fire had dwindled to embers. She felt a mingling of tenderness and determination settle in her chest. Rising carefully, she tried not to disturb the sleeping dragon. He let out a soft snort but did not wake. Stepping away, Daenerys fed a few more pieces of wood into the brazier to keep the chill at bay. As she watched the flames spark anew, she made a silent vow that soon she would need to make a plan, how to reveal Somberion to the world when the time was right and how to protect him in the meantime. It was a delicate balance. Discretion was paramount, but secrecy carried risks of its own. Already, the realm whispered about her mental state, about the Targaryen madness that might yet manifest in her. She could not afford to appear unstable or deceitful. She must remain in control, always. She gazed upon Somberion's sleeping form, mesmerizing in its dark radiance. No matter the trials ahead, she refused to let fear dictate her choices. This dragon was a gift, and she would not let the realm's skepticism or the ghosts of her past strip her of this new hope. Weeks turned into months, and the snows finally began to melt in the north, giving way to a reluctant spring. Messages poured into Dragonstone, reports of renewed trade, minor skirmishes among lords disputing territories, and murmurs of a growing religious sect that preached against dragon tyrants. Daenerys dispatched envoys to quell unrest, yet she could not ignore how her dragons had become a rallying point for both devotion and resentment. Dragons had always been a symbol of House Targaryen's dominion, but also the cause of old wounds. The faith militant in King's Landing centuries ago had challenged her ancestors. Even now, some men would never bow to a queen with fire at her command. Despite these ripples of dissent, the realm was relatively peaceful compared to the chaos of the long night. Tyrion and Varys, if he still lived, would have said that peace was an opportunity for careful governance, for winning hearts and minds. For Daenerys, it meant fewer distractions from her secret. She could devote more time to ensuring Somberion thrived and to planning for the day of his reveal. But the day came sooner than she wished. A routine supply run to the cavern one afternoon turned into a near catastrophe when the mason, the same one Missandei had discreetly bribed, decided to double-check his handiwork in the area. He stumbled upon the tapestry and noticed a faint light leaking from the edges of the hidden door. Daenerys had just entered the chamber moments before, bringing fresh fish from the local fishermen. She heard the mason's muttered curses, the scuff of boots against the stone floor. Her heart lurched. Somberion, sensing the disturbance, rose and hissed at the door. His golden eyes flashed. Smoke curled from his nostrils. Daenerys cursed under her breath. The mason was not supposed to be there, and if he raised an alarm, half the castle guard could come running. She had to act quickly. Abandoning caution, she grabbed the iron latch and yanked the door open. The startled mason stumbled backward, nearly dropping his tools. His eyes bulged as he glimpsed the shape of a dragon behind the queen. In that instant, Daenerys knew her secret had been compromised. "Why, your grace," the mason stammered, fear and bewilderment twisting his face. He looked at Somberion, who bared his teeth in a low growl. The man froze, his hammer clattering to the floor. Daenerys lifted her chin, heart pounding. "You were not given leave to enter here," she said, her tone clipped. "This area is restricted." The mason swallowed hard, casting panicked glances at the black and gold dragon behind her. I only came to check the repairs." I didn't know." His stammered words collapsed into frantic pleas. Daenerys saw the terror in his eyes. Terror could become hysteria, and hysteria could spread like wildfire through a fortress. If he fled and told others, her carefully constructed secrecy would unravel in an instant. She had to contain this. "Come yourself," she said, voice softer yet firm. She stepped into the corridor, closing the door behind her just enough so Somberion wouldn't charge through. She considered the mason's trembling figure, the beads of sweat gathering on his brow. "You have seen something that was never meant for your eyes." He nodded frantically, hands raised as though to ward off a blow. I'll not speak of it, I swear. Please. My family depends on me." Daenerys studied him. He was a commoner, not a lord with ambitions or political alliances. He was frightened, and fear might be the best motivator to keep him silent, but it was also a liability. Mercy and caution warred within her. She recalled the moment she had executed Varys for betrayal, the sting of heartbreak that followed. Yet this was different. The mason had not conspired against her, he had merely stumbled upon a secret by accident. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, noticing how he flinched. "Look at me," she commanded. He obeyed, eyes wide as a cornered animal. "You will speak of this to no one. If you keep your silence, your life and your family are safe. You will be rewarded for your discretion." The man nodded so vigorously that his face reddened. "Your grace, I swear it." "Not a word, never." Daenerys felt a surge of relief, tempered by cold realism. Words were easy to say under duress. People betrayed their promises when fear or coin or threat of violence intervened. She considered the possible outcomes. She could have him imprisoned, threaten his family, or even have him executed to ensure his silence. But that would stain her conscience, and she was trying to be better, not a tyrant. Instead, she resolved to keep him close, to ensure he remained loyal through a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Go," she said, stepping back. "Return to your station. Continue your work. If you serve me well and guard this secret, you shall be safe and paid handsomely." She paused, letting her voice harden. "But if you reveal anything you have seen here, anything at all, your life is forfeit and your family will face the consequences." He nodded again, tears of relief welling in his eyes. "Thank you, Your Grace, thank you. I won't breathe a word. By the 7, I promise." He stumbled away, retrieving his hammer with shaking hands, casting one last terrified glance at the door. Daenerys waited until his footsteps faded. Then she let out a long breath, her hand shaking as she turned the latch. The situation was dire. Even if the Mason kept silent, the risk of rumors spreading multiplied. Soon, she might not be able to contain the truth. She entered the chamber and Somberion rushed forward, muzzle pushing against her midsection as though sensing her distress. She stroked his scaled brow, trying to calm the tumult in her own heart. It had been close. Too close. The day she had feared was creeping nearer. Summoning Missandei that evening, she explained what had happened. Her friend's face blanched. "We can't rely on his silence alone," Missandei cautioned. "Fear makes men unpredictable, but so does desperation. Someone might suspect something if he behaves differently." Daenerys nodded. "I know. We'll keep watch on him, ensure his family is cared for so he has no incentive to betray us. But this changes nothing. Somberion can't remain hidden forever." Missandei regarded her with sympathy. "Perhaps it's time we prepare for a controlled reveal. If you unveil him on your own terms, the realm's reaction might be more manageable than if rumors leak out from frightened servants." Daenerys considered the idea. The thought of stepping forward, proclaiming the existence of a 4th dragon, and bracing for the realm's response made her skin prickle. Yet it might be the only path that allowed her to maintain authority. A carefully orchestrated unveiling could frame Somberion as a symbol of hope, a living testament to House Targaryen's enduring legacy rather than a hidden weapon. She could gather her most trusted allies, show them the wonder of a newly hatched dragon, and spin the narrative as one of rebirth rather than aggression. She sighed, weariness etched in her features. "I will think on it," she said. "But we must move carefully. Too many lords and knights still doubt me, and the scars of the last war have not fully healed." Still, the seed was planted in her mind. Over the following days, Daenerys found herself imagining how she would present Somberion to the world. She could see the faces of her subjects, a mixture of awe and fear, as she stood with the black and gold dragon perched behind her. She could nearly feel the hush that would descend upon a great hall if Somberion spread his wings, let out a roar, and breathed a plume of fire into the air. Perhaps she could accompany the reveal with gestures of goodwill, pardons for minor rebellions, investments in the small folks' welfare, public statements about forging a peaceful future under the Targaryen banner. But fate rarely waits for a queen to act on her own timetable. One evening, as Daenerys reviewed trade documents with Tyrion, there was a sudden commotion outside the council chamber. The door burst open and a guard rushed in, pale-faced. "Your Grace, Lord Tyrion, beg pardon, but there's trouble in the yard." Daenerys stood, alarmed. "What kind of trouble?" The guard removed his helmet, wiping sweat from his brow. "The dragon, Your Grace." Tyrion blinked, confusion furrowing his brow. "But Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion are roosting on the cliffs." He trailed off, turning to Daenerys. Her blood froze. "Somberion. How?" Her pulse hammered and she moved toward the guard. "Explain quickly." The guard swallowed. A small dragon, black and gold, was spotted by the stables. It flew out from one of the windows in the lower keep. Some men tried to corner it, but it panicked and now it's in the courtyard, snapping at anyone who approaches. The stablemaster's been burned. "It's chaos, Your Grace." Daenerys felt the blood drain from her face. Somberion must have slipped out somehow. Perhaps the door to the secret passage was left ajar, or he had grown curious about the world beyond the cavern. Now the entire garrison had caught sight of him. Panic and fear would spread like wildfire. She could almost see the headlines in her mind. "The Queen hid another dragon among us." The realm's trust would waver. "Have the guards stand down," she ordered, her voice sharper than steel. "No one is to harm him. I will handle this personally." She strode past the guard, Tyrion at her heels. His face betrayed a storm of questions, but he said nothing, perhaps too stunned by the revelation that there was a 4th dragon on Dragonstone. They descended the winding stairs, emerging into the open air of the courtyard. Torches flickered all around as dusk settled. A crowd of soldiers, stable hands, and onlookers formed a wide circle, murmuring and shouting. In the center of that circle stood Somberion, wings half spread, snapping at anyone who came too close. Smoke curled from his nostrils, and the scorched stones at his feet attested to his agitation. He let out a plaintive, high-pitched roar. Daenerys' heart twisted. He was frightened, cornered by strangers. "Make way!" she shouted, pushing through the throng. Some recognized her voice and parted, though others stared in disbelief. Tyrion followed behind her, mouth set in a grim line. Somberion whirled at the sound of her voice. His eyes blazed, but recognition softened his posture. He let out a keening cry, almost like a distressed child. Daenerys approached slowly, hands spread. "It's all right," she murmured, moving as though approaching a skittish horse. "I'm here." A hush fell over the courtyard. Soldiers gripped their spears. Stable hands eyed the beast with a mixture of terror and fascination. Tyrion's gaze flicked between Daenerys and Somberion, the questions in his eyes giving way to realization. The queen had been hiding a dragon. This much was clear to everyone now. Daenerys continued her slow approach, heart pounding in her throat. Somberion lowered his head toward her, his breath hot against her face. She gently laid a hand on his scaled snout, feeling the tension in his body. "You're safe," she whispered. For a moment, the entire courtyard seemed to hold its breath. The young dragon exhaled, a puff of smoke brushing against her hair. Daenerys dared to smile, relief flooding her. She turned to the onlookers, her voice echoing with regal authority. "Stand down. No harm is to come to this dragon. He is under my protection." A wave of murmurs surged through the crowd. Some bowed their heads in deference. Others stared with raw apprehension. But no one dared defy her outright. Tyrion stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Your Grace, I believe we have much to discuss." Daenerys straightened, hands still resting on Somberion's snout. She was acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes upon her, of the unspoken questions that would soon erupt into a cacophony of demands. Why had she kept this a secret? What did it mean for their alliances? For the realm's peace? For the line of succession? Yet in that moment, she gazed into Somberion's eyes and felt a swell of fierce pride. The time for secrets had ended in a dramatic flourish. Now was the time to command respect, to show the world that the Mother of Dragons still walked among them, forging a new path for House Targaryen. Fear and hope intermingled, stoking the fire in her veins. She addressed the crowd, her voice carrying both the weight of her authority and the fervor of her conviction. "Yes, there is another dragon. His name is Somberion, and he is mine. Let all here bear witness and speak of what they have seen. He was born in fire and is protected by my blood. Any who dare raise a hand against him will answer to me." A startled silence followed, broken only by the crackle of torches. Then, slowly, the crowd's tension shifted. Some men lowered their weapons. A few even dared to step closer, curiosity overcoming their fear. Tyrion exhaled, stepping close enough to speak quietly in Daenerys' ear. "You've turned rumor into fact tonight. The world will know soon. We must plan carefully for the fallout." Daenerys nodded, her gaze never leaving Somberion. "I know," she murmured, "but I won't let them take him from me, no matter what it costs." In the days that followed, Dragonstone buzzed with the news of the secret dragon. Letters went out to lords across the realm. Missandei worked tirelessly to manage communications, presenting Somberion's reveal in the most favorable light, an omen of prosperity, a testament to Daenerys' bond with magic, a sign of renewal after the devastation wrought by war. Tyrion, shocked though he was, moved quickly to spin the story. He portrayed the hidden egg as a miraculous discovery, urging the realm to see it as a hopeful turn in House Targaryen's legacy. Some believed, some questioned, and others whispered darkly that Daenerys was amassing more weapons of destruction. But the queen held her head high. She had made her choice, and Somberion, now freed from the shadows, roamed the skies above Dragonstone under her watchful eye. He took his first short flights with uncertain flaps of his wings, and Daenerys rejoiced to see him adapt to the open air, feeling the wind under his golden membraned wings. Some men still cowered in his presence. Others looked upon him with cautious awe, aware that the queen's power now surpassed even what they had feared before. Yet Daenerys ensured that no cruelty was shown to him. She personally oversaw his feeding, commanded that no soldier raise a spear without just cause, and even allowed a select few knights carefully vetted to witness his training. A handful found the courage to step forward and offer respect, forging the beginnings of a new bond. Not all were convinced. Whispers of rebellion flickered in distant corners of Westeros from lords who had once supported her only out of fear of her existing dragons. Some might see Somberion's existence as cause for revolt. Yet Daenerys refused to retreat into secrecy. If she was to be a true queen, she had to stand by all her children in the bright light of day. And so she did. Publicly, she introduced Somberion in the courtyard where he had made his debut, delivering a speech about unity, rebirth, and her desire to protect all living souls under her reign. The young dragon roared at her side, a swirling vision of black and gold shimmering like a dawn-lit storm cloud. For a moment, even the most jaded onlooker felt the breath of legend. This was the stuff of ancient ballads, the union of dragon and Targaryen that once forged the Seven Kingdoms into one. In private, Daenerys worried about how the lords of the realm would respond. She knew that unveiling a new dragon might strengthen her reputation among some, but stoke fear and resentment in others. Tyrion cautioned her to prepare for challenges, to use diplomacy where she could and force where she must. She listened, but her heart brimmed with a renewed sense of purpose. Somberion's presence reminded her of the dream she once cherished, to break the wheel, to bring freedom to the oppressed. The realm had seen enough bloodshed, enough secrets. She would not hide anymore. Somberion grew quickly, tasting freedom in the skies over Dragonstone. Daenerys soared beside him on Drogon, watching with pride as her younger child wove through the clouds, testing the limits of his newfound wings. The bond between them deepened, and Daenerys felt her hope rekindle. Even after all the wars, betrayals, and heartbreak, something beautiful had been born in the quiet darkness beneath Dragonstone. Something that could guide her toward the queen she longed to be rather than the conqueror fate had nearly turned her into. One crisp morning, as the gulls called over the crashing waves, Daenerys and Tyrion rode out to the cliffs to watch the dragons. From the cliff's edge, they saw Drogon, Rhaegal, Viserion, and Somberion all circling in the distance, a sight no living soul had ever beheld before, for Targaryen dragons in the sky at once. Even Tyrion, always so measured, could not help but let a small smile tug at his lips. "It's a remarkable sight," he said softly. "You truly are the mother of dragons." Daenerys nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "This realm has never seen anything like it," she said, her voice laced with awe and determination. She watched as Somberion broke formation, performing a playful loop around his older siblings, his gold-flecked wings catching the sunlight. For all their differences, the four dragons seemed to accept one another in a tenuous harmony. She felt tears prick her eyes, a mixture of pride and longing. Tyrion turned to her, solemn once more. "But be prepared, Your Grace. This changes the balance of power. Some will flock to your banner out of reverence or fear, but others will conspire in the shadows. They'll see you as an unstoppable force that must be checked." Daenerys inhaled sharply, the salt-laden breeze filling her lungs. "Let them conspire," she said quietly. "I will not cower. I've walked through fire, I've endured loss and betrayal. Somberion's birth is not a herald of more death, it's a testament to what can still grow in the ashes." They stood there, queen and advisor, watching the dragons dance in the bright morning sky. And for the first time in what felt like ages, Daenerys allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a better future, a future molded by her own will, her own compassion. The fourth dragon, kept secret from everyone for so long, now soared alongside its brethren, a living symbol of resilience. Deep in her heart, Daenerys felt a profound certainty: the path ahead would not be easy. But she would walk it fiercely, with all the fire in her blood and all the hope she had carefully shielded through the darkest nights. Somberion had been born in secret, nursed in the shadows, yet had come forth into the light with a roar that shook even her own convictions. The realm would reckon with this new power. And Daenerys would meet that reckoning with her head held high, for she was no longer alone in her quiet dream of renewal. She had Somberion, her hidden child, no longer, blazing a new chapter in the annals of House Targaryen, one that might yet rewrite the destiny of Westeros itself. Daenerys Targaryen lingered at that cliff's edge far longer than she intended, drawn by the sight of her four dragons gliding through the sky. In the weeks that followed their synchronized flight, she found her purpose renewed in ways that reverberated through the corridors of Dragonstone and beyond. The realm spoke of Somberion with awe and fear. Ravaged though Westeros had been by the wars and the long night, stories had a way of breathing life into even the most exhausted souls. Here was a rumor that proved to be more than rumor. Daenerys Targaryen had unearthed a new dragon, had nurtured it in secret, and now it soared with its siblings. Some believed it was a sign of favor from the gods, a promise that House Targaryen's strength would endure. Others whispered that such an act portended further devastation should the queen's temper ever flare. Whichever stance they took, none doubted that the Mother of Dragons was an even more formidable figure now. For living dragons circled the skies of Dragonstone, each one a testament to the ancient magic Daenerys carried in her blood. She could sense tension mounting. Letters arrived by Raven from every corner of the realm. Some lords sought an audience, wishing to renew their vows of fealty with renewed caution now that her power had grown. Others made no attempt to hide their hostility, denouncing the birth of a fourth dragon as an omen that the Targaryen line would once again dominate the continent by fear. Daenerys had grown accustomed to such words over the course of her conquests. She had faced the skepticism of Qarth, the defiance of slavers in Astapor and Ukai, and the cunning of Myrini's noblemen. None of that compared to the betrayal that once consumed her within the Seven Kingdoms, nor the heartbreak she experienced when the realm nearly lost itself to the encroaching dead. Now, though the White Walkers were defeated, the living had turned to infighting and politics again, as though they had already forgotten the fragility of their existence. One evening, Daenerys summoned Tyrion, Missandei, and Grey Worm to a private chamber in Dragonstone's keep. Over a modest table, the four discussed the swirl of rumors and pleas that had beset the castle's maesters day and night. Missandei diligently read the letters they had received. Lord Glover in the north, restating old grievances about Targaryen rule but offering polite congratulations on the new princeling of the skies. Lady Waynwood in the Vale, wondering whether peace in the region could endure. Lord Royce, deeply wary of all dragons and especially wary of a secret one now hatched in the dark. The tone of each missive varied, but beneath the courtesies and titles lay a common thread. They all wanted to test Daenerys' intentions and see if her devotion to the four dragons meant a turn toward tyranny, or if it signaled that her dream of a just realm still stood. Tyrion eyed each piece of parchment as though they were living things. "Your Grace, this is precisely what we discussed before Somberion emerged. Fear can unify, but it can also breed resentment that festers into rebellion. We must tread carefully." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I've drafted responses that emphasize your wish to preserve peace and stability, but the question remains, is the realm willing to trust that your dragons are guardians and not weapons of wrath?" Daenerys let her gaze drift to the flickering candlelight. Many believed the same of Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion once. But each of them was forced into war and bloodshed. "Perhaps the realm sees me as a breaker of chains only so long as their own power isn't threatened. The moment they feel overshadowed by dragonfire, they cling to old prejudices." Grey Worm said nothing, but his presence exuded quiet resolve. He had seen the horrors of war, the unending cruelty of slavers, and he had dedicated his life to Daenerys. Whatever path she chose, he would follow. Missandei's features were thoughtful, her dark eyes steady on the queen's face. She alone knew from the start about Somberion and had guided Daenerys through the uncertainty of secrecy. Now that the dragon was public, the challenges had shifted, yet the heart of the matter remained, ensuring that Somberion, and by extension all of Daenerys' children, would be safe in a land that could not help but fear them. By midnight, they had decided on a strategy. Tyrion would pen careful letters, balancing courtesy and firmness. Daenerys welcomed respectful visitors who wished to see proof of House Targaryen's rebirth, but she would not tolerate those who insulted her children or spoke openly of rebellion. The realm would be reminded of her role in saving them from the army of the dead, but also of the cost she bore during that apocalyptic struggle. Missandei would arrange a series of open audiences once the roads had cleared of winter snows, inviting lords and ladies to Dragonstone to witness the dragons. Perhaps seeing Somberion in a controlled setting, witnessing his bond with Daenerys, would quell the rumors that he was some monstrous, uncontrollable beast. It was a calculated risk. Bringing strangers near her youngest dragon could be dangerous if their intentions were foul. But Daenerys believed that hiding him away in shame would serve only to strengthen suspicions. In the ensuing weeks, the flow of visitors grew. Some, like Ser Davos, arrived out of genuine loyalty, though his presence, while reassuring, was punctuated by caution. He had seen what dragonfire could do to men unprepared for its fury. Others came with guarded curiosity. Lords of lesser houses trying to determine how to align themselves in a world where dragons had returned to dominance. Daenerys, seated in the great hall of Dragonstone, watched them with measured poise. Somberion was not always present. Often she kept him within the courtyard or let him fly overhead while she addressed the various delegations. But occasionally when the situation called for it, she summoned him. He would appear at the hall's threshold, wings half spread in a show of instinctive pride, gold-veined membranes catching the torchlight. The lords might gasp, but each took note of how quickly he moved to Daenerys' side, pressing his muzzle into her hand. He was no mindless terror set loose upon them. He was, in every sense, her child, bound by the unspoken trust between a dragon and its rider. After one such audience, during which a minor lord from the Reach nearly fainted at Somberion's approach, Daenerys retreated to the outer battlements, seeking a moment of solitude. She gazed across the sea, the horizon tinted with pale gold from the setting sun. Somberion, still energized from the crowd's attention, circled in the sky above the castle walls. His siblings had taken to roosting on the rocky spires that dotted Dragonstone's perimeter, occasionally lifting off in lazy arcs that cast great shadows across the courtyard below. It was a sight that once would have been impossible to believe, for dragons lording over the same fortress. And yet here they were, the wind of renewed possibility stirring under their wings. She thought about Drogon's growth over the years, how monstrous and majestic he had become. Somberion, too, would grow beyond any mortal scale, given time. The memory of Regal and Viserion soared through her mind, reminding her of the joyous day in Karth when the three had first flown in unison. If Somberion thrived, he might someday rival Drogon in size. The idea filled her with both pride and a daunting sense of responsibility. For dragons, each capable of great destruction if mishandled, each requiring more food and care than some entire armies might provide. It was no small thing to keep them fed, especially with winter's grip only just receding. She had ordered more farmland to be reclaimed, fishing fleets to expand their hauls, livestock to be raised in regions that had been ravaged by war. A living dragon was the apex predator, but a starving dragon was a horror that could turn the common folk against her in mere days. She was still lost in thought when Tyrion appeared at her side. He cleared his throat softly, his posture giving away a certain weight on his mind. Daenerys turned to him, searching his face. "Tyrion," she said, acknowledging him, "you wear a look that suggests you've more burdensome news." "In part," Tyrion replied, folding his hands. The wind teased at his tunic, fluttering the edges. "Word has reached me that certain influential lords in the Westerlands and the Reach have begun holding secret councils. They question whether a queen with 4 dragons is a queen who will eventually reduce them all to cinders if they displease her. They fear the fate of King's Landing may be visited on them if they speak out of turn." He met her gaze, carefully measuring her reaction. "I've tried to quell those fears in my letters, but it seems there's a growing faction suspicious of your power." Daenerys felt a flicker of anger, then recognized the old ache it stirred in her chest. She remembered how King's Landing had fallen to her, the streets alight with fire, the bells ringing. She remembered the horror and the aftermath, the lines that had been crossed in that final battle. That day, she had come closer to a place she never wished to revisit. The knowledge that some might still view her as a threat akin to her father, the Mad King, was not new, but it never ceased to wound her pride and her conscience. She squared her shoulders, letting the briny wind cool her anger. "Then we shall show them that I do not seek their destruction," she said with measured calm. "Let them come, let them see my dragons, let them see how I rule. If they wish to keep their distance, so be it. But I will not hide my power just to soothe the nightmares of men who cannot distinguish me from the ghosts of the past." Tyrion nodded, his expression pensive. "A fair approach as long as they do not mistake your patience for weakness. Already, some among them might be whispering of forging alliances against you if they sense you're unwilling to use your dragons as a deterrent." She let out a breath, staring across the sea. "If they force my hand, I will defend myself. But I won't revert to being the conqueror who set King's Landing aflame. Not again." Tyrion placed a hand on the stone parapet, leaning on it. "That's precisely why I still believe in you, Your Grace. And I suspect many of our allies do, too, those who have seen your compassion. Yet you must realize that even the best of men can be corrupted by fear and ambition." Daenerys closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memory of Somberion's hatching swirl in her mind. The sense of wonder she'd felt, holding that small black and gold life in her hands. The promise she'd made to herself that she would protect him from the realm's ugliness. Now she realized the challenge was protecting the realm from itself by making sure her power served as a shield, not a hammer. "I will keep building," she said softly, meeting Tyrion's gaze. Building a realm that can trust its queen, building a future that doesn't rely on fear. And if some cannot see that vision, I'll show them another way. Tyrion looked as though he wanted to say more, but simply bowed and left her to her thoughts. Daenerys remained on the battlements, watching Somberion's silhouette cutting across the sky. She vowed she would not let old ghosts, nor new fears, strip her of the hope she had fought so hard to rekindle. In the ensuing days, she worked tirelessly. Her presence in the great courtyard became a frequent sight, reviewing the dragons' feeding schedules alongside her unsullied captains and stable asters who handled the livestock brought for the dragons' meals. She personally oversaw deliveries from nearby fishing villages, sometimes riding Drogon along the coast to greet the fishermen and ensure them of protection from Ironborn raiders. Each effort served to remind the small folk that though a new dragon soared in the skies, the Queen's attention remained on their well-being. When rumors of a rebel band in the Crownlands surfaced, Daenerys dispatched a contingent led by Grey Worm to negotiate a peaceful surrender rather than unleashing any of her dragons upon them. Reports of that lenience filtered through every tavern. Some said it was a sign of softness, others a sign of wisdom. Either way, it stoked conversation and speculation. Somberion himself grew bolder by the day, testing his wings on longer flights. Daenerys often watched him race regal or playfully nip at Viserion's tail in midair. Drogon, the largest and fiercest, tolerated the presence of his smaller sibling with surprising equanimity. Perhaps the bond they shared through Daenerys guided them all toward cooperation. Where once Drogon had grown territorial and occasionally snarled at Rhaegal and Viserion, now he seemed almost patient with this new arrival, letting Somberion circle around him in playful arcs. These interactions offered Daenerys a glimmer of optimism. If dragons could adapt and accept change, perhaps the mortal lords of Westeros could do the same. But not all news was promising. One afternoon, Missandei approached Daenerys with a troubled expression. The Queen was in the war room, reviewing the map of Westeros, considering the logistics of rebuilding roads and ensuring trade routes were safe from brigands. Missandei's face, usually so calm, betrayed unease. Daenerys set aside a sheaf of parchment and turned her full attention on her friend. "Missandei," she asked gently. Missandei inclined her head before speaking in a quiet voice. "Your Grace, I've just received word from an envoy who traveled to the Riverlands. Lord Tully is still loyal, but there are smaller lords who've banded together in defiance of your claim. They say they fear that your new dragon is a sign you intend to force your will upon them as your father once sought to do. Some are calling it the return of the nightmare of the Black Dread. They evoke Balyrion's name. They believe a second Targaryen conquest may be at hand." Daenerys felt a jolt go through her. Balyrion the Black Dread had been Aegon's mount, the greatest of all dragons. To have Somberion compared to that ancient terror was at once flattering and horrifying. She had never intended to replicate the conquests of her ancestors through sheer intimidation. "Which lords?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "Minor ones, mostly. Houses you haven't personally contacted. They hide behind Lord Tully's alliance, but in truth they answer to no one but their own interests. Word is they convene in secret at Old Keeps. They're determined not to yield if you send forth your dragons." Daenerys leaned over the map, her palms pressing into the carved wood. The Riverlands had been scarred by years of war. In some ways, she did not blame those lords for fearing another fiery devastation. But fear unchecked could lead to open defiance, and open defiance could lead to new wars. She closed her eyes, inhaling slowly. "They test me," she murmured. "They want to see if I'll crush them as my father might have." Missandei nodded. "Yes, your Grace. And from what the envoy said, they're stirring up local peasants with tales of dragons ravaging fields, urging them to take up arms rather than pay taxes or supply your armies." Daenerys could imagine the scenario. Farmers recalling the horrifying legends of dragons scorching farmland in the Dance of the Dragons or during the Field of Fire. Now rumor said there was a new black-scaled terror flying about, and that rumor would gain momentum if left unchallenged. "Send word to Lord Tully that I request his presence here," she said. "And we'll need to draft letters to each of these minor lords, inviting them to speak with me directly. I won't rely on second-hand rumor to interpret their grievances." "Yes, your Grace," Missandei replied. She made a note on a small scrap of parchment. "Should we also prepare a royal progress into the Riverlands? Perhaps let them see the dragons in a peaceful manner." Daenerys glanced at the table where carved wooden figures represented her forces. A progress meant traveling, exposing herself to potential ambush, and a demonstration of might could be misconstrued as a threat. But if done carefully, it might also bridge the gap between her and those who saw her only as a distant legend of fire and destruction. She weighed the risks. We'll consider a progress once we hear from Lord Tully, she decided. I want to gauge his counsel on which roads are safest and which are still war-torn. If we appear in force, we must be sure it's perceived as protective, not invasive. Missandei bowed and departed. Daenerys stared at the map a while longer, her thoughts swirling. She was the queen of Westeros, and part of her yearned to unify these lords through reason and shared purpose. Another part recognized the strong possibility that some men would never bend the knee unless forced, especially now that they believed she had revived the spirit of Balerion. The old Targaryen playbook relied heavily on fear. No one could deny that fear was effective. But she had paid dearly the last time she wielded Dragonfire in King's Landing, and she carried the burden of that day like a burn on her heart. If she were to rule with fear alone, then the realm's progress would crumble the moment her dragons departed or faced any threat. She wanted something more enduring, something grounded in true loyalty, or at least acceptance that she would not become the tyrant they feared. That evening, she stepped onto the landing platform carved into Dragonstone's outer wall where the dragons often perched. Somberion was there, curled near a brazier that had been left lit to guide them back at night. He lifted his head, golden eyes gleaming in the firelight. Daenerys approached him with a quiet smile, resting a hand on his warm scales. He had grown in these past months, his form more muscular, his wings broader. Stroking his neck ridges, she whispered in Valyrian, letting the ancient words flow like a lullaby. Somberion answered with a low rumble of contentment, gently butting his snout against her torso. In those moments, she felt the swirl of her anxieties recede. She let her mind flow back to the day of his birth, to the hush in the hidden chamber, the first time those obsidian-hued scales glistened with life. He was not an abomination or a harbinger of doom. He was her child, and she would fight tooth and nail to ensure he was allowed to exist without being reviled. Dragons were neither inherently good nor evil. They were reflections of their riders, and she intended to mirror compassion and strength, not cruelty. Yet as the moonlight cast the shape of his wings across the stone, she also knew that compassion alone was rarely enough to quell men's fears. She would have to be strategic, show them she would not hesitate to protect what was hers. In her younger years, she might have embraced that aggression too quickly, enthralled by the idea of justice forged through fire. Now, after witnessing the devastation war had wrought across Essos and Westeros, she sought a finer balance. She traced her fingers along the ridges of Somberion's spine. "We'll show them we are not monsters," she whispered in the tongue of her ancestors. "We will show them we are guardians." The next morning, she penned her own letters with a careful hand. She wrote to each of the fractious lords of the Riverlands, inviting them to Dragonstone or offering to meet them at a neutral location if travel proved difficult. She wrote to Lord Tully directly, requesting his presence and detailing her plans for a potential journey through the region. She also wrote to other key allies, Sansa Stark in the north, Gendry Baratheon in the Stormlands, and representatives in Dorne, asking for their counsel and letting them know that if the Riverlands threatened open defiance, she might require support to maintain stability. She did not phrase it as a threat, but rather an appeal to mutual cooperation. She wanted no more wars, but also no illusions that she would let the realm fracture under suspicion and rumor. Weeks passed without immediate reply from the rebel lords, though Lord Tully's messenger arrived swiftly to confirm his willingness to attend her summons. Tyrion took that as a good sign. If the Lord Paramount of the Trident remains loyal, the minor houses might still fall in line, he suggested. Daenerys only nodded, not wishing to place too much hope in one man's ability to reign in others. She wanted them to see her as something other than the shadow of her father or the bitter memory of King's Landing's destruction. She intended to stand before them with Somberion at her side if necessary, to show them the bond of trust rather than the lash of intimidation. In the meantime, daily life at Dragonstone carried on. Merchants arrived by ship with goods from Essos, which Daenerys encouraged, hoping to boost trade and alleviate lingering famine in regions still recovering from the wars. Missandei worked tirelessly to coordinate the movements of relief ships to needy villages along the coast, while Grey Worm continued to train new recruits among the Unsullied, ensuring the Queen's Guard remained formidable. Reports came in that scattered pirates had begun harassing smaller ports, taking advantage of the realm's uncertain mood. Daenerys directed her captains to patrol with vigilance, reminding them that the sea lanes must remain safe if Westeros was to rebuild. She even went so far as to send a polite but firm warning to the Iron Islands, cautioning them that her watchful eyes would not tolerate further raids on the mainland. During one such day, she received unexpected word from the north. An envoy arrived dressed in stark gray, bringing a letter stamped with the seal of House Stark. The messenger was a tall, solemn woman who bowed deeply before Daenerys, offering the letter with the stoic courtesy so characteristic of the North. Daenerys dismissed the woman to the guest quarters, then unsealed the letter in private. She recognized Sansa's firm handwriting immediately. The message was direct and surprisingly warm. Sansa wrote of the North's ongoing recovery, how she and her people were slowly replenishing their grain stores and repairing old holdfasts. She expressed cautious optimism about Daenerys' stance with the new dragon. "We have all lived under the weight of suspicion and fear for far too long," Sansa's letter read. "Should you find yourself in need of northern support to quell these rumors in the Riverlands, you have but to send word. We will not see the realm splinter again if it can be saved." Sansa ended with a note that Jon Snow, who had once abdicated the northern throne for her, was traveling across the far wilderness of the north, searching for answers to mysteries of his bloodline and the memory of the Night's Watch. He had chosen a quieter life, Sansa wrote, but he remained a friend who would come if called. Daenerys felt an odd rush of emotions at that mention of Jon. She had not seen him in what felt like an age, the distance between them marked by unspoken regrets and the complicated revelations of his heritage. Yet Sansa's tone suggested no lingering animosity. The letter was an olive branch from a region that had once eyed Daenerys with hostility. She took that as a promising sign. If even Sansa Stark, once so determined to protect the North from southern intrusions, now offered her support, perhaps the realm was slowly, cautiously turning toward unity. She penned a grateful reply, acknowledging the North's generosity and confiding some of her anxieties about the lords in the Riverlands. Though she refrained from going into great detail, she made clear her intent to solve the matter peacefully if possible. She assured Sansa that she valued the North's friendship and would do all in her power to maintain harmony between them. The letter was dispatched by Raven that very evening. Although she did not say it in words, part of her hope that her show of transparency would reach beyond the North, that lords across Westeros would see her building bridges rather than burning them. Soon after, Lord Tully arrived. He came with a small retinue of knights, each bearing the Tullyfish sigil. The years weighed on him, his hair was shot with gray, and his face bore lines of sorrow, likely from the tragedies that had befallen his house during the war. Yet his bearing remained proud, dignified. Daenerys greeted him in the courtyard. Somberion was visible high above, circling with regal, but the black and gold dragon did not descend immediately. She noticed how several of Tully's knights glanced uneasily at the skies. "Your Grace," Lord Tully said, bowing carefully. "Thank you for granting me audience here at Dragonstone." Daenerys inclined her head in return. "Lord Tully, you are most welcome. It's good to see that the Riverlands have a steady leader once again. I trust your journey was uneventful." He managed a small smile. "The roads are passable, though still pocked with old battle scars. We came as swiftly as we could manage." She led him into the great hall, where Tyrion, Missandei, and Grey Worm awaited. Over a modest feast of fish and bread, they discussed the state of the Riverlands. Daenerys listened intently to Lord Tully's reports, farmland still undepopulated, riverside towns slowly rebuilding from the destruction caused by the war against the Night King and the subsequent conflicts. Only then did they address the murmurs of discontent and fear. Lord Tully steepled his fingers, looking across the table at Daenerys. "I do not doubt your intentions, your grace. I fought beside your forces against the dead, and I saw your dragons burn the whites in the north. But some of my banner lords, they're haunted by the stories of Aegon's conquest, of the Field of Fire, of Harrenhal's ruin. To them, these legends are as real as yesterday. They worry that if they displease you, you may replicate such devastation upon them." Daenerys nodded, her features thoughtful. "I am no Aegon, and certainly no Maegor," she replied. "I've heard these fears all across the realm, and I do not dismiss them lightly. My father's legacy casts a long shadow, but I did not come to Westeros to annihilate it. I came to save it from the White Walkers, and now I seek only to unite its people under a fair rule. The dragons are part of my heritage, yes, but they need not be a reason for terror." Tyrion leaned forward. "Lord Tully, you know firsthand that the Queen has spared those who opposed her in the past, provided they would pledge peace. She's granted pardons to lords who bent the knee after Cersei Lannister's defeat. Would it help if her grace traveled through the Riverlands, meeting these lords and showing them that Somberion is neither a Balerion reborn, nor some ungovernable beast?" Lord Tully considered it, his gaze flicking to Daenerys. "It might, though some might interpret such a display as a threat if you arrive with all 4 dragons overhead." Daenerys exhaled softly. Then perhaps I will bring only one, she said. Not to intimidate, but to assure them that if I wanted them destroyed, I would not have invited them to parley. Somberion is young and, in truth, less terrifying in scale than Drogon or Regal. If they see him behave peaceably, it might soften their view. Lord Tully stroked his beard, nodding slowly. That could work. Still, these lords are stubborn. They are men who've lost families to war, to famine. They see dragons as harbingers of more war. But if you approach them with humility, and if I accompany you as their Lord Paramount, some may be willing to listen. Daenerys exchanged a glance with Tyrion, who offered a small shrug that seemed to say, "This is the best path we have." She turned back to Lord Tully. "Very well. I will make the journey. But I won't come alone. A measure of security is necessary. And if they try to ambush my people, I will defend myself." Lord Tully bobbed his head. "Understood, Your Grace. We'll arrange the route carefully. There's an old castle near the Red Fork that's relatively intact. It sits at a crossroads close to several of these lords. I can bid them gather there for a conference." They spent hours finalizing the details. The journey would begin once Daenerys had sent word to these suspicious lords, giving them time to arrive. She would travel by ship up the Blackwater, then overland, escorted by a modest force of Unsullied. Somberion would join by air, but Regal and Viserion would remain behind at Dragonstone with Grey Worm and the bulk of her forces as a precaution. Drogon's presence would not be wholly absent. He might fly across the skies in distant overwatch, but the Queen would not land with all her children in tow. It was a delicate dance of power and reassurance. 3 days later, ravens flitted across the Riverlands, carrying Daenerys' official invitation. She worded it carefully. "I wish to meet with you, lords of the Riverlands, to hear your concerns and prove my intentions are not to subjugate you by terror. We have all lost much in these wars. Let us not lose the chance for lasting peace." Each letter bore her signature alongside Lord Tully's endorsement. Then, to maintain transparency, she also informed Sansa Stark, Gendry Baratheon, and other allies of her intentions. She wanted no rumors swirling that she was plotting something clandestine in the heart of the Riverlands. By the time the date of departure arrived, Dragonstone's courtyard bustled with activity. Soldiers checked their weapons and loaded supplies into wagons. Missandei oversaw the final listing of provisions, grains, dried fish, fresh water for the men, even a supply of goat carcasses for Somberion's meals. Daenerys stood at the castle gates, dressed in practical riding leathers reinforced with subtle plating, her silver-gold hair braided behind her head in a style reminiscent of her Dothraki days. She felt that old adrenaline stirring in her veins, the sense of venturing into uncertain territory. But this was not a conquest, it was a mission of diplomacy. Still, the risk loomed large. One arrow loosed from the shadows could end her life, or the life of her dragon. One ambush could spark another war. Tyrion arrived at her side, wearing a heavy cloak to guard against the lingering chill in the air. "All is prepared, Your Grace," he said. "We'll sail to the Blackwater and then to Lord Tully's seat before moving inland." She inclined her head. "Have we heard any formal refusals from those lords who fear me?" "Not formal. 1 or 2 wrote short replies claiming illness or distance, but none threatened violence outright," Tyrion replied. "That's as good as we can hope for, I suppose." Daenerys nodded. She turned her gaze upward. Somberion soared overhead, circling in anticipation of the flight to come. Drogon, perched on a high battlement, let out a rumbling growl as though reluctant to see his mother depart. She sent him a silent promise that she would return, that this was a necessary step to secure their future. Then she strode forward, leading the procession down the winding path to the harbor. The wind carried the tang of salt, mingling with the whiff of dragonfire in the air. She glanced over her shoulder at Dragonstone's imposing towers, wondering how the lords of old would judge her choice to reason with defiant banner lords instead of crushing them. But she knew her conscience would never allow her to revert to the mindless brutality of a tyrant. Let them see her as she truly was, queen and mother both, determined to guide Westeros into a new era. The voyage by sea was uneventful, save for occasional sightings of merchant vessels or fishermen hailing the queen's passing. Somberion followed overhead, his reflection flickering on the water's surface. More than once, Daenerys emerged on the deck to watch him glide above. The sailors, too, seemed entranced, pointing and murmuring as they caught sight of the sleek black shape contrasted against the sky. It was a novelty seeing a young dragon so close, his golden wing veins catching sunlight in a dazzling display. He would at times dive low to scout the ship's surroundings, and Tyrion joked that no pirate with half a mind would dare approach them under that watchful presence. When they reached the mouth of the Blackwater, Daenerys could not help recalling the last time she had sailed those waters bent on claiming King's Landing. Memories of the battered city, the bells tolling, and the conflagration that had followed loomed in her mind. She closed her eyes, inhaling slowly, reminding herself that she was not that person anymore, that the scars of that day had guided her toward a different path. The capital was not her destination now, nor did she yearn for its charred remains. Her sights were set on forging a peace that might last a generation or more. Once they docked at an inland harbor near Lord Tully's designated checkpoint, she and her retinue disembarked. The crisp air carried the scent of fertile soil and early blossoms. Spring had finally arrived in earnest, and the riverland's rolling hills showed patches of green. Somberion landed in a wide clearing near the shore, startling a flock of waterfowl into a frenzy. Unsullied scouts fanned out, ensuring the roads ahead were clear. Daenerys carefully approached Somberion, stroking his neck while giving gentle instructions to remain close and watchful but not aggressive. He let out a small growl of understanding, exhaling smoke from his nostrils. The black scales along his throat shimmered in the midday sun, and she thought, not for the last time, how truly beautiful he was. Lord Tully greeted her at the riverside. He traveled by horse, accompanied by a handful of knights carrying the Trout banner. He bowed, then gestured to a line of waiting horses and wagons. "Your Grace, we've prepared a suitable campsite for you a few leagues upriver. The old Crossroads Castle is another day's ride from there." "Thank you, Lord Tully," Daenerys replied, mounting a white mare with practiced ease. Missandei rode close behind on a chestnut mare, while Tyrion found a pony to suit his stature. The Unsullied formed a protective perimeter around them, disciplined and silent. Somberion launched into the air with a rush of wind shadowing them from above. The formation set off at a steady pace, traveling roads lined with budding trees and scattered farmland. Occasionally, curious peasants paused in their labors to stare as the retinue passed, some crossing themselves at the sight of the dragon overhead. They made camp that evening in a wide clearing near a copse of willow trees. Soldiers erected tents, and Daenerys' personal pavilion stood at the camp's heart. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the bright stars unveiled themselves, reflected in the winding river. Somberion perched on a rocky outcrop not far from the camp, watchful as ever. A wary hush seemed to settle over the small folk who had accompanied the caravan or followed it out of curiosity. Yet no one dared wander too close. Daenerys left a pair of Unsullied to keep watch for any misguided attempt to approach the young dragon at night. Tyrion joined her beside a modest fire. They sat on small stools, the flicker of flames dancing on their faces. Grey Worm and Missandei handled the final details of securing the perimeter, leaving the queen and her hand a rare moment of calm. Daenerys rubbed her hands together to warm them, glancing around at the silhouettes of tents and the glint of spear points under torchlight. "Still no sign of ambush," Tyrion remarked quietly, as though speaking it too loudly might conjure trouble. "Perhaps that is a good omen." Daenerys nodded, eyes drifting to the dark outline of Somberion. "One can hope. If any lords planned treachery, they'd find it hard to succeed with him above. I suppose fear can work both ways." Tyrion's lips curved into a half-smile. "You're using your might as a deterrent without employing it as a blunt instrument. That's precisely the balance you've been striving for, no?" She shrugged a little. "It is. But I worry that if any violence does break out, it will prove every fearful rumor about me and my dragons. We walk a tightrope, Tyrion." He exhaled. "A tightrope indeed, but that's politics in Westeros. Perhaps it always was. The difference is that now the realm has actual dragons as part of the equation. Rest assured, I'll do my best to keep the fools from tipping us all into the fire." She offered him a faint smile. "Your best has always served me well." They lapsed into a comfortable silence, the crackle of the fire their only companion. Daenerys allowed her thoughts to wander. In a distant corner of her mind, she imagined how different life might have been if she had never found that fourth egg, if Somberion had remained hidden in the depths of Dragonstone. Would her realm be calmer, or would it still seethe with suspicion? Perhaps it was inevitable that the Targaryen name would spark fear. Yet she could not bring herself to regret hatching Somberion. He was a symbol of hope for her, a testament that she could still nurture life rather than extinguish it. The next day's ride led them deeper into the riverlands. The countryside bore scars, burned-out farmsteads from old battles, half-collapsed holdfasts that had once sheltered families from roving armies. Daenerys felt a pang of empathy for the people who still struggled to rebuild. War had raged here too many times in the last few decades, between Lannisters and Starks, between Boltons and Baratheons, between living and dead. Now she hoped to prevent another devastating conflict. Their route took them through small hamlets where men and women stood in doorways, uncertain whether to come forward or hide. A single glimpse of Somberion overhead was enough to keep them frozen in place. Some knelt, others simply stared. Daenerys caught their eyes and tried to smile, as if to say, "I am not here to bring you harm." By midday, they spotted the old crossroads castle. Moss clung to its weathered stones and vines snaked up the walls. It had once been a minor seat, though war and neglect had diminished it to near ruin. Still, there was enough of a courtyard to host a gathering, enough of a great hall to house a modest assembly. Daenerys's unsullied swept the perimeter, confirming no traps waited within. The place smelled of damp earth and rotting timber in some corners, but at least the main structure stood. They found a band of knights already encamped near the castle's approach. Their banners indicated allegiance to a few lesser houses: House Smallwood, House Mouton, House Deddings. Each had a complicated history in the Riverlands. Daenerys could practically feel their apprehension as she dismounted, Somberion's shadow drifting over them. Lord Tully, riding beside her, offered them a courteous greeting. Several of the knights stepped forward, eyes flicking warily to the sky. "Your Grace," said one knight who wore a battered tabard bearing the red salmon of House Mouton. We received your invitation. Our lords are within, awaiting your arrival." Daenerys nodded. She saw how his hands twitched near the pommel of his sword, betraying his nerves. "Lead on," she said calmly. "We come in peace to speak." Tyrion, Missandei, and Grey Worm formed up beside her while the Unsullied took positions along the courtyard's edges. Lord Tully dismounted, passing his reins to a squire. Daenerys spared a glance upward, issuing a low whistle. Somberion heard the cue and swung out wide, circling at a higher altitude, giving the men below some respite from his looming presence. The knights seemed relieved, though none fully relaxed. They proceeded into the castle's great hall, an echoing space lit by torches and scattered with old benches. At the far end stood several men in threadbare finery. One was broad-shouldered and carried a stern look. Another was wiry, with a cunning gleam in his eyes. A third looked older, weathered by years of hardship. Each wore a sigil that Daenerys recognized from the old histories or from the wards of the Riverlands. They bowed stiffly, though their postures hinted at simmering tension. Lord Tully stepped ahead. "My lords, I present Her Grace Daenerys Storeborn of House Targaryen, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms." The broad-shouldered one stepped forward first. "Your Grace," he said in a voice that tried to project respect but faltered under strain. "I am Lord Bywater. You invited us here to speak of your intentions for the Riverlands." Daenerys inclined her head. "Yes, Lord Bywater. I understand you and your fellow lords have concerns. I wish to address them directly, not through rumor or hearsay." The older man, whose sigil identified him as Lord Perrin of a minor house, spoke up. "We have seen the ravages of war in these lands. Forgive us if we are wary of dragons. We remember the stories of Harrenhal's flames, and we know what befell King's Landing." Daenerys's expression remained composed, though she felt the sting of old guilt. "I will not dismiss your fear," she said plainly. "I understand it. The Targaryen name is entwined with fire in the annals of Westeros. But ask yourselves, have I marched upon you with an army of thousands? Have I set your fields ablaze? No, I have come to speak, to build trust." The wiry man with cunning eyes, Lord Garrity, interjected. "Trust can be broken in a heartbeat when a dragon looms overhead. How are we to trust that you won't one day turn that beast upon our keeps and villages if we displease you?" Tyrion stepped in smoothly. "It's a fair question, my lord, but consider this. If Her Grace sought to rule by fear alone, she wouldn't have offered you a peaceful summit. She would have let her dragon speak for her. Instead, she sailed upriver, invited you to gather, and came with fewer soldiers than most kings would consider prudent. Does that sound like a ruler who wants to incinerate her subjects at the first sign of dissent?" Lord Bywater and Lord Garrity exchanged uneasy glances. The older Lord Perrin shifted on his feet. Daenerys glanced at Grey Worm, who stood with unwavering calm, spear in hand. For a moment, the hall was silent save for the crackle of torches. Outside, Somberion's distant roar reverberated, and a flicker of alarm crossed the men's faces. Daenerys took a slow breath. "What I seek is not your submission through terror. I want your acknowledgement that we share a realm and must find a way to mend it together. You are free to speak your concerns, to request the Queen's justice, to govern your lands in peace. But if you raise arms against me, If you stoke rebellion and endanger innocent lives, I will defend my throne. That is my duty, as it was the duty of any monarch who see. Aim before me." Lord Tully stepped into the silence. "I have seen her grace's mercy firsthand. She spared lords who surrendered, offered them a place in her vision of the future. She has not pillaged or put towns to the torch. The rumors of a new Black Dread are only that rumors. Somberion is not Balerion, and you do yourselves no favors by conflating them." Lord Garrity's lips tightened. "And what if we simply wish to be left alone, to rule our own modest lands without bending to foreign might?" "You forget," Daenerys said gently, "that I was born on Dragonstone in Westeros. I am not a foreign invader. Yes, I traveled across the sea and freed slaves in Essos, but my heritage is of the Seven Kingdoms, and I claimed the throne only after the realm was in chaos. If you wish to keep your lands, your laws, so be it, provided you recognize my crown as your rightful sovereign. That is the feudal pact. In return, I protect you from outside threats and from any who would do you harm." A hush followed, broken only by the shuffling of feet and the faint drip of water from a crack in the hall's ceiling. Lord Bywater coughed into his hand. "We feared your dragons would be used to enforce every whim, whether we could fulfill it or not. Our coffers run thin, our harvests are barely enough to feed our people. The last war left many fields fallow." Daenerys softened her tone. "Then perhaps we can help you rebuild. My administration has been working to distribute resources across the realm. If you communicate your needs honestly, we can arrange shipments of grain from the Reach, fish from the coastal regions, or seeds to replant your fields. I do not wish to see the Riverlands starve. I have faced starvation myself, and it was only through unity that we overcame it." The words seemed to take some of the tension from Lord Bywater's rigid posture. He hesitated, glancing at Lord Garrity, who looked less certain. Lord Perrin, the older one, spoke again. "And what do you ask in return, your grace?" "Loyalty," Daenerys answered quietly but firmly. "An end to the malicious rumors that I intend to unleash dragons upon you. A willingness to show me that you will not harbor those who plot rebellion or violence against the throne. Do that, and I will consider you my vassals in good standing, deserving of the realm's protection. Resist out of unfounded fear, plot in the shadows, and you force my hand. Do not become the architects of your own destruction." An uncomfortable stir passed through the men. Tyrion took a step forward, seizing the moment. "Her Grace's terms are neither cruel nor unprecedented. Every king or queen in Westeros has expected as much from their bannermen. The difference is that she has the means to enforce it, dragons, but she has chosen not to do so unless provoked. Think on that." Slowly, grudgingly, Lord Bywater gave a nod. "We will consider these words, your grace. Perhaps we have been listening too long to the ghost stories and old hatreds. War has made us all skittish." Lord Tully offered a reassuring smile. "We have all lost enough to war. This is an opportunity to heal." Daenerys dipped her head in agreement. "Should you wish to speak with me further, I will remain here another day. After that, I move on to visit other lands in need of the crown's assistance. My retinue is not large. You can see for yourselves that I come not as a conqueror, but as a ruler seeking to understand the burdens of her subjects." A muttered conference passed among the three lords. Finally, Lord Garrity exhaled, nodding his head once, albeit with visible reluctance. "I shall speak to those who share our concerns. Perhaps if you truly do not wish to subjugate us in fire, we can find a path forward." Daenerys felt a measure of tension drained from the air. She gestured for them to join her at a rough-hewn table in the hall's center, where a simple meal of bread, cheese, and ale had been set out. They ate together, though warily, discussing roads in disrepair, bandits that still harried travelers, the need for new mills and restocked fisheries. Tyrion offered suggestions gleaned from his knowledge of economics, while Missandei took careful notes to ensure none of their concerns would be forgotten when Daenerys returned to Dragonstone. Through it all, Daenerys remained calm and courteous, determined to illustrate that she was not the slavering monster of their nightmares. Outside, through the broken windows, they could catch glimpses of Somberion wheeling across the sky, occasionally letting out a curious screech. By the time evening approached, a hesitant truce formed. Lord Bywater and Lord Perrin consented to sign a new oath of loyalty contingent upon receiving assistance to rebuild. Lord Garrity remained guarded, but he, too, stayed to speak further, pointing out specific villages that needed urgent help. Daenerys assured him that if the harvest this year was poor, shipments could be arranged from the southwestern coasts. She even proposed the idea of stationing a small, non-intrusive force of Unsullied in certain troubled areas to ward off bandits. Lord Garrity nearly balked at the notion of foreign soldiers occupying his land, but Tyrion's quick explanation of how the presence of disciplined troops could deter raiders swayed him enough to accept a trial arrangement. Night fell and the men departed for their own camps. Daenerys stepped outside into the crisp air, feeling the rough stone of the courtyard under her boots. Torches flickered along the walls, illuminating the battered ramparts. She looked up and saw Somberion perched upon the castle's highest tower, tail swishing slowly. He was a silent sentinel, vigilant in the night. The moonlight glistened on his black scales and the golden veins in his wings shimmered when he flexed them. Daenerys approached quietly. He craned his neck down, letting her stroke the scales near his jaw. "Well done," she whispered, as though the dragon might understand. "You kept your distance. You let them see you without unleashing any fear or fury. That alone might have done more to ease their minds than all my words." Somberion let out a gentle rumble and nudged at her hand, and she smiled. Tyrion joined her, glancing upward at the young dragon. "I must confess, Your Grace, it's still astonishing to see him so close. I remember when you hatched Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, but this time you did it alone, without fanfare. He's truly magnificent." She nodded, her gaze lingering on Somberion. "He is that, and so much more. Sometimes I worry I've thrust him into a realm that fears what he represents." Tyrion's voice was quiet. "Maybe so, but with time you might change that. You're showing these men an alternative to the old cycle of fire and blood. Offer them open hands, not clenched fists. It won't be simple or swift, but it's the only way forward if you wish to be more than just a conqueror." Daenerys sighed, stepping back from Somberion's towering presence. "I know. And I'll persist. Let them see that I value peace, but will defend my people if needed. That's the essence of ruling, is it not?" Before Tyrion could respond, there was a burst of raucous laughter from a nearby tent. Some knights from Lord Tully's retinue were sharing tales of old battles, relieved that the day hadn't ended in violence. Daenerys allowed herself a faint smile. One day without bloodshed was a victory. A small one, perhaps, but a victory nonetheless. The next day, true to her word, she remained at the castle, granting private audiences to local landholders and common folk who dared approach. Each audience revealed a tapestry of struggles. A blacksmith whose forge had been destroyed in the war, a farmer whose son had gone missing, a miller who lacked funds to rebuild a water wheel. Daenerys listened, Missandei recorded their pleas, and Tyrion offered hints of how the crown might help, whether through coin, resources, or the dispatch of a small squad to keep the roads safer. The lords who had once seemed so rigid observed her patience in hearing out these woes. Though skepticism still clung to some, Daenerys detected a softening around the edges. She even ventured with a small guard to a nearby village, letting Somberion fly overhead, providing a spectacle that sparked awe rather than panic. The villagers gaped at the young dragon, but they also marveled at how Daenerys spoke kindly and offered them assistance. Several even dared approach the queen directly to thank her or to bow awkwardly, having never seen a monarch face to face. By the time she announced her departure, Lord Bywater and Lord Perrin had openly sworn fealty anew. Lord Garrity, though still cautious, agreed to cease any negative rhetoric about Targaryen tyranny and to pass word among other hesitant houses that the queen was not a threat so long as no rebellion stirred. They parted ways with a wary semblance of respect. Before leaving, Daenerys left them with a promise to send more supplies once she returned to Dragonstone so their damaged roads and farmland could be further restored. She also reminded them that any sign of banditry or raiding parties could be reported to her for swift action. Somberion's presence made the promise ring with quiet menace, but also with reassurance that they had a formidable guardian on their side. As Daenerys and her entourage rode out from the old Crossroads castle heading toward the next stop in her itinerary, she felt a mixture of relief and lingering tension. She knew her work was far from done. One meeting would not erase decades of trauma and centuries of dragon-haunted folklore. Yet a seed of change had been planted, a spark of possibility that perhaps, through patience and steady governance, the name Targaryen might come to mean not wanton fire and blood, but guardianship and renewal. Over the following weeks, the pattern repeated. She visited scattered holdings along the way, accompanied by Lord Tully or his representatives, continuing to gather intelligence on local conditions. Missandei coordinated shipments of necessary supplies wherever she could. Tyrion engaged the local leaders in discussions of how to best rebuild trade routes. Grey Worm maintained discipline among the Unsullied, who conducted themselves with a quiet professionalism that impressed even those who mistrusted foreigners. Somberion, always overhead or perched at a safe distance, became a symbol that sparked endless conversation. People wondered if he was indeed less fearsome than Drogon or if he might one day surpass even the mightiest dragons of old. During a rest stop by a grassy knoll near the banks of the Red Fork, Daenerys took some time alone with Somberion, feeding him fresh goat supplied by a local herd. He devoured the meal eagerly, the heat of his breath causing the air to shimmer. When he finished, he gazed at Daenerys with those bright coal-red eyes, the gold flecks shimmering in the midday sun. She sensed his curiosity, his youthful desire to test his limits. She remembered how Drogon had once carried her across the skies, fierce and uncontainable. Somberion was different, at times more attuned to her emotions as though they shared a deeper resonance. She placed a hand on his snout, the warmth making her fingers tingle, and spoke softly in High Valyrian. "May we bring hope, you and I," she whispered, recalling how she had once whispered lullabies to his egg in the hidden chamber. "May we prove that dragons need not herald only death. Let them see what we can be." Somberion responded with a low rumble, pressing lightly against her palm, and she felt an almost electric bond flow through her. There was a moment of perfect unity, mother and child, queen and dragon. Then he spread his wings and leaped into the sky with a powerful beat, ascending higher until he was but a black and gold silhouette against the pale blue above. The final leg of their journey took them back to the port where their ships waited. Along the way, they passed through ravaged land that had once been the site of a major battle against the Whites. The earth was scorched and churned, littered with half-buried bones and rusted fragments of weapons. Daenerys dismounted to survey the area, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She remembered how close they had come to total annihilation, how the living had banded together for that final stand in the north. All of it reminded her that however petty these feuds and fears in the Riverlands might seem, mortal squabbles were overshadowed by the knowledge that darkness could return if unity faltered again. She knelt down and picked up a broken sword, its blade pitted and blackened by some unnatural frost. The tension in her chest knotted. The long night had passed, but the scars remained. Tyrion approached quietly, gazing at the desolate scene with somber eyes. "A reminder," he murmured, "of what we faced and how we prevailed only by standing together." Daenerys rose, the broken blade in her hand. "And a reminder of what we stand to lose if we allow fear to rule us. Let these bones rest in peace and let the living learn from them." She dropped the sword fragment onto the ashen ground. Wind stirred the dust, carrying it across the field. Somberion, sensing her unease, flew low overhead, his wingtips nearly skimming the barren plain. His presence felt like a protective aura. Daenerys drew in a steadying breath and returned to her horse, continuing onward. Each hoofbeat felt like an echo of the realm's heartbeat, fragile yet persistent. When they finally reached the small port, Daenerys and her retinue reboarded their ships. The return voyage to Dragonstone was brisk, the tide and wind were in their favor. Somberion soared above them, occasionally dipping low to ride the sea breeze. Soldiers and sailors alike admired his graceful arcs, perhaps finding a measure of pride that this dragon belonged to their queen. By the time the dark silhouette of Dragonstone appeared on the horizon, Daenerys had gathered her thoughts, preparing to finalize the aid she had promised to the Riverlands. Tyrion was already drafting letters in his cramped handwriting, specifying allocations of grain, coin, and men. They docked at Dragonstone's harbor late in the day, greeted by Grey Worm's second-in-command. From him, Daenerys learned that the realm had remained calm in her absence, though rumors still traveled faster than ravens. News of her peaceful conference with the Riverlands lords had sparked a flurry of discussion from the Reach to the Vale. Some believed she was cunningly lulling the realm into complacency. Others were heartened that she sought to address local grievances. By the time she disembarked, she felt both fatigued and invigorated. She had done much, yet so much remained. In the castle courtyard, Regal and Viserion greeted Somberion with a cacophony of roars. Drogon, perched above the main gate, let out a thundering call that made the stones tremble. Somberion answered, diving in a playful arc before settling onto a ledge. Watching them, Daenerys felt a deep contentment, a sense that no matter the realm's fears, her children recognized one another as kin. She prayed that the people of Westeros might someday share that sense of kinship. Before nightfall, she reconvened with her advisors, summarizing the progress made and the alliances tentatively strengthened. Missandei read out letters that had arrived in her absence, some from Sansa Stark encouraging the Queen's efforts, others from Gendry Baratheon who offered to send shipments of or for forging new tools if the Riverlands needed them. A letter from Dorne offered measured support as well, clarifying that if these lords sought conflict, Dorne would stand by the Targaryen throne. Each message felt like another piece in the tapestry of unity she was weaving. And though there were gaps, though some threads were frayed, it was a tapestry far more complete than it had been a year ago. When at last she retired to her private chambers, Daenerys felt an immense weight behind her eyelids. The day had been long, the weeks on the road taxing. Still, she could not rest before visiting Somberion one more time. She slipped through the halls, up a winding stair to a broad platform carved high into Dragonstone's central tower. There, she found Somberion curled in a half-sleep, the moonlight glinting off his dark scales. He stirred at her approach, lifting his head and letting out a soft purr-like sound. She reached out, resting her palm against his brow. The warmth relaxed her, easing the tension in her muscles. "Thank you," she murmured as though he might truly comprehend her gratitude. "For showing them they needn't fear us. For reminding me that hearts can change if we give them a chance." Somberion's eyelids fluttered and he relaxed again, drifting deeper into slumber. She stood there a moment longer, letting the gentle night air wash over her. Exhaustion finally overcame her, and she made her way back to her chambers. Slipping under the thick furs of her bed, she allowed herself a small smile. The journey had tested her patience and nerves, and more challenges certainly awaited. Yet she had not fallen prey to cruelty or vengeance. She had wielded compassion as deftly as a sword, and in so doing had won a fragile peace for the Riverlands. If she could replicate that effort across every corner of Westeros slowly, methodically, then perhaps she could prove once and for all that the Targaryen name did not have to inspire terror. Somberion would grow to full grandeur in time, and the realm's trust must grow with him. She let that hope cradle her into sleep. Morning light shone on Dragonstone, illuminating both stone and sea. Daenerys awoke to the calls of gulls circling above the battlements. She rose feeling more rested than she had in weeks. Outside, she could already hear the bustle of activity. Men delivering fresh supplies, the clang of blacksmiths at work repairing arms and armor, the stir of new visitors requesting audience with the Queen. The realm never slept, and neither could its ruler, not for long. She went about her morning routine, meeting briefly with Tyrion to sign official orders releasing coin for the Riverlands reconstruction. Then receiving Grey Worm's report on training new recruits for the City Watch in King's Landing. It still felt strange to think of King's Landing, a city she had once claimed in fire, but that now struggled to rebuild. Progress had been slow, but the ruins were being cleared, new homes erected, though many survivors had chosen to settle elsewhere. Shortly before midday, Missandei informed Daenerys that a small delegation from the Vale had arrived to request an audience. Daenerys recalled that Lady Waynwood and Lord Royce had been among those who cast wary eyes upon her dragons. Intrigued, she agreed to see them at once. The great hall was prepared, though it remained quieter than the grand throne rooms of old. She had never been one for needless pomp. The Vale Knights entered wearing plain cloaks over their steel plate, one bearing House Royce's sigil of runes, another wearing the moon and falcon for House Arryn, though that line was nearly extinct. They bowed respectfully. "Your Grace," said the Royce Knight, "we come bearing greetings from our Lady Regent. She has heard of your recent trip to the Riverlands and is curious about your intentions for the Vale. With 4 dragons in your care, some among us wonder if the Vale's independence is threatened. Others hope that your might could protect the Eyrie from any renewed chaos." Daenerys regarded them levelly. "My intentions for the Vale are the same as for the rest of Westeros. Peace, stability, mutual prosperity. I have no desire to invade any holdfasts or subjugate loyal houses. The Vale has bled enough in wars past. Should the Vale require aid or fear any external threat, I will answer with the strength of the crown. But I will not march my armies into your mountains unbidden." The Arryn Knight inclined his head. "Our Lady Regent will be pleased to hear this. Yet she wonders if you plan to host a formal gathering, something akin to a grand council, to reassure all the lords of the realm that they remain free to govern their own domains under your sovereign protection." It was an intriguing suggestion. Daenerys steepled her fingers, considering the possibilities. A grand council could help unify the great houses, allow them to air concerns openly. But it also risks dredging up old grievances if not managed well. Tyrion, standing beside Daenerys, nodded. "Indeed, your grace. Such councils have been attempted before, not always with success. Yet the gesture might encourage transparency and quell rumors of tyranny." After a contemplative moment, Daenerys addressed the knights. "Inform your Lady Regent that I am open to hosting such a gathering in a few moons' time, once the harvest season is underway and travel is simpler. If the Vale, the North, the Reach, Dorne, the Stormlands, and the Westerlands all consent to attend, we might settle many outstanding issues at once. Until then, I ask only that the Vale refrain from lending credence to the fearmongers who say my new dragon heralds war." The Royce Knight bowed. "We will convey your words accurately, your grace." With that, they concluded their audience, and Daenerys was left pondering the ramifications of a grand council. It felt both daunting and necessary. Her successes in the Riverlands could serve as a blueprint for addressing larger concerns. If she could stand before all the lords with Somberion, no, with all 4 dragons visible yet restrained, perhaps the realm would truly see that she ruled with measured strength. The question remained whether old rivalries and resentments would mar such a gathering. But she resolved to try. Better to confront fears openly than let them fester in the dark. She spent the afternoon in correspondence, drafting letters to Sansa Stark, Gendry Baratheon, the Lady of the Vale, and any other influential leaders who might be swayed to attend a grand council. Missandei aided her, ensuring the tone balanced authority with sincerity. Tyrion began making logistical notes on how best to accommodate so many dignitaries, perhaps in King's Landing, once it was suitably repaired, or in a neutral location like Harrenhal, though Harrenhal's cursed reputation might spook some. Regardless, the invitations would soon depart by Raven. As evening fell, Daenerys found herself drawn to Dragonstone's highest parapet. The wind was brisk, carrying the scent of brine and distant storms. She gazed out at the sea, recalling how far she had come. From the frightened girl fleeing across the narrow sea, to the liberator of slaves in Essos, to the would-be conqueror of Westeros, and now to a queen attempting to stitch the realm together with the threads of compassion and firm resolve. Once, she had believed her destiny was to claim the Iron Throne by any means necessary. Now, she saw that destiny was about forging a peace that might outlast her lifetime. A fragile peace, to be sure, but better than the endless cycle of vengeance. She felt the presence of her dragons all around her, the older 3 perched in the rocky crags, Somberion somewhere above, scanning the horizon. They were free, as she had always wanted them to be, yet bound to her will by mutual trust. Let the realm see that no chains were needed to keep her children from burning villages. Let them see that a Targaryen queen could wield fire without succumbing to madness. Somberion drifted into view, hovering near the parapet. His wings beat the air in a steady rhythm, stirring Daenerys' hair into a silver halo around her head. He lowered himself until his talons touched the stone, folding his wings neatly. She smiled, stepping forward to run a hand along his flank. He breathed out a plume of warm air that smelled faintly of brimstone, and she felt the softness in his manner. He had grown, but he had also grown closer to her in spirit. She whispered to him in Valyrian, praising his grace and courage. He blinked those luminous eyes, apparently content simply to have her near. The sea stretched in every direction, an expanse of deep blue, flecked with white. The future stretched before her in much the same way, vast, uncertain, beckoning. She could almost hear the voices of the lords she had placated, the small folk who had witnessed her generosity, and the countless souls who still eyed her with doubt. She would prove them wrong. She would guide Westeros toward a lasting unity, forging alliances where once only grudges had festered. She had seen what destruction looked like, and she refused to let that be her legacy. With a final pat on Somberion's side, she lifted her gaze to the horizon. In the coming moons, she would host a council that might shape the fate of the 7 kingdoms. She would not shrink from the challenge, nor would she let fear of the past chain her. The realm would see that the 4th dragon was not a new Balerion reborn, but a herald of the promise Daenerys Targaryen carried in her heart, that fire could warm and protect as much as it could destroy, and that a queen whose blood ran hot with magic might yet guide her people with clarity and grace. And so she stood there at the edge of Dragonstone, Somberion at her side, the wind billowing her cloak, the gulls crying overhead, and felt hope pulse through her veins as steadfastly as the ancient power coursing through her Valyrian blood. She was Daenerys Stormborn, the mother of dragons, and with Somberion's help, she would show Westeros that a new dawn had come. One tempered by wisdom, steeled by resolve, and lit by the gentle glow of a dragon's flame. Daenerys Targaryen rose before dawn the next morning, urged awake by a curious stirring deep in her bones. She had dreamed of dragons, of herself, and Somberion flying through clouds that shimmered like molten gold. In that half-remembered haze, the air had felt electric with promise, as though the entire realm held its breath, waiting for what she would do next. Now, standing at the window of her private chamber, she watched first light wash over Dragonstone's rugged parapets. The gulls were already circling above the battlements, cawing in the crisp air. Beyond them, somewhere beyond mortal sight, her dragons roost, stirring at the day's approach. She dressed in a simple gown, practical yet bearing small Targaryen embroidery at the collar. Somberion's golden swirl had inspired a new thread design recently, a subtle black and gold filigree that Missandei had commissioned from a Myrish tailor. Daenerys smoothed the fabric absently as she moved into the corridor, flanked by 2 unsullied guards. Though she had not planned on hosting open court this early, she felt compelled to see what news the day might bring. She found Missandei in the council chamber, already sorting through letters that had arrived by Raven. A few candles still burned low, casting flickering shadows on the polished table. Missandei looked up and offered a small smile. "Good morning, Your Grace. I wasn't expecting you so soon." Daenerys returned the smile. "I woke early. Perhaps too many dreams. Anything of note?" Missandei handed her a small scroll. "Word from the Vale, confirming that they have received your invitation for a grand council. They sound receptive, though they request details on location and timing." Daenerys broke the seal with a precise motion and scanned the text. As the knights had hinted the day before, Lady Waynwood and Lord Royce were indeed open to the idea, though they raised concerns about the safety of traveling with so many highborn in one place. They worried about old vendettas flaring. Daenerys understood that fear. Each region harbored grudges that could erupt if not carefully managed. She set the parchment aside, considering. "I thought King's Landing might be suitable, but the city is still recovering. Harrenhal is large, yet cursed by legend and half-ruined in places. The north might be too distant for Dorne and the Reach. Perhaps the Riverlands again, somewhere less foreboding than Harrenhal." She paused, tapping a finger on the table. "Lord Tully mentioned an old fortress near Riverrun that was being repaired. Or we might even consider resuming the tradition of the Great Council at Harrenhal to show we do not fear the past." "It's a difficult choice." Missandei nodded. "You could invite the lords to propose a venue themselves. That way no one feels forced into a location that might give advantage to their rivals." Daenerys gave a short laugh. "Yes, but it might spark a contest of petty politics, each region championing its own seat. Still, you have a point. Transparency might ease suspicions. She would need Tyrion's counsel on that matter, but for the moment, she placed the letter aside, moving on to another scroll that bore the seal of the Stormlands. Gendry Baratheon's seal, in fact. She broke it open to find a concise yet friendly missive congratulating her on her efforts to pacify the Riverlands without violence. He reported that the Stormlands were calmer now, with less banditry than before, and that the harvest was looking better than expected after years of warfare. He also offered to send skilled carpenters to King's Landing, should the crown require assistance in rebuilding certain neighborhoods. Daenerys smiled at the thought. Once, House Baratheon had overthrown her father's reign, yet here Gendry stood as an ally, forging ties through acts of service rather than conquest. "It seems there are more glimmers of hope," Daenerys said softly, letting Missandei read over her shoulder. "The realm is not as fractured as it once was. Perhaps the Grand Council can actually succeed." Missandei carefully placed the letters into neat stacks. "It will, Your Grace, if you continue on this path of measured diplomacy. The rumors about Somberion are quieter now. People still talk, of course. But your trip to the Riverlands showed them that you mean no harm." Daenerys felt a surge of quiet pride. "It was only a beginning, but I'll see it through." In the corridor outside, she heard the soft echo of footsteps approaching. Tyrion's voice soon followed, speaking in hushed tones to one of the Unsullied. He entered the chamber with a small leather-bound volume tucked under his arm. "Ah, already at work, I see. Good morning, Your Grace." "Tyrion," Daenerys greeted. "You're up early as well." He offered a crooked grin. "Hard to sleep when we're balancing the future of an entire realm on the edge of a pin. I was reviewing some old accounts of the Great Council of 101 AC. It seems that was a particularly large gathering at Harrenhal, with hundreds of lords present to settle a succession dispute." Daenerys gestured for him to join her at the table. "I recall reading about it, where the realm chose Viserys over Rhaenys. It set off a chain of events that eventually led to the Dance of the Dragons. Didn't it?" Tyrion nodded. Yes, in a roundabout way. The impetus was a good one. Gather the lords to peacefully determine a matter of succession. But the undercurrents of resentment ran deep, eventually culminating in conflict. One lesson from that time is that while councils can create an illusion of unity, old wounds can fester and resurface. Daenerys exhaled softly. So we must tread carefully. She eyed the door, recalling their conversation about potential venues. What do you think about letting the lords propose the location of this grand council, as Missandei suggested? They'll feel more invested in the outcome if they have a say. Tyrion pursed his lips. It might work, though it could lead to squabbling over which region hosts the event. Still, it would at least dispel the notion that you're dictating all terms. If you present them with a short list, King's Landing, Harrenhal, Riverrun, maybe add Old Town as an option, though that's quite far south, then let them vote or discuss among themselves, you might achieve consensus. Daenerys glanced at Missandei, then back at Tyrion. Very well. Draft a proposal. We'll highlight each location's pros and cons and allow them to weigh in. Make it clear that I do not cling to one site out of personal preference. Also, keep the time frame flexible but not too distant. A council that occurs years from now is no help. Tyrion dipped his head. I'll see to it, Your Grace. They delved into the details. How many knights to allow each lord to bring as an escort, how to manage accommodations for so many delegates, how to ensure no lords arrived with an army capable of starting a war on the spot. Missandei made meticulous notes, and the conversation reminded Daenerys of her days ruling Meereen, juggling alliances and ensuring no single faction grew too dominant. She had never imagined she would need to perform such delicate balancing acts in her homeland. But here she was, forging new traditions to prevent history from repeating itself. By the time they emerged from the council chamber, the sun was well above the horizon, bathing Dragonstone's courtyard in a pale glow. Unsullied moved in disciplined formations, and a handful of servants carried crates of supplies across the yard. Daenerys heard the flap of mighty wings, and her heart leapt to see Drogon soaring overhead, accompanied by Rhaegal. She guessed Viserion and Somberion were not far behind. Watching them, she felt the same sense of wonder she'd felt years ago when her first 3 dragons were small enough to perch on her shoulders. They had grown into creatures of awe, each with a distinct personality that few but she could truly read. She wondered if the realm could come to see them as protectors rather than nightmares. And that thought led her to quietly beckon Tyrion. Send a message to King's Landing. Remind the craftsmen there that if they complete the renovations on the old amphitheater by the southern wall, we can host more gatherings for the people. I'd like them to witness the dragons in a setting that isn't tied to war. Tyrion raised a brow. A public demonstration? You risk stirring old memories of the Dragon Pit fiascos, Your Grace. The Targaryens once used spectacles in the Dragon Pit, and it became an arena of blood and ruin. Daenerys shook her head. I'm not talking about the Dragon Pit. Merely an open-air space where small folk could gather to see that dragons can be commanded, that they needn't be monstrous. I'll do it slowly, step by step. Very well, Tyrion said, lips quirking. We'll see if the king's men, your men, rather, can expedite that construction. Days flowed into one another as Daenerys and her court refined the plans for the Grand Council. Ravens went out bearing carefully worded invitations inviting the 7 kingdoms' major players to weigh in on the location and format. Replies trickled back. Many lords offered suggestions, some pushing for King's Landing as a symbol of unification, others preferring a more neutral location like Harrenhal. Some expressed eagerness, others skepticism. Dorne wrote back to say they would attend wherever the Queen deemed fit, provided the climate wasn't too harsh for their envoys. Sansa Stark's letter from Winterfell was blunt. She doubted many northern lords would relish traveling as far as Old Town, but they would come if the Queen commanded. Gendry Baratheon suggested the Stormlands, though he noted it was less central. The Vale proposed a site near the Bloody Gate, arguably the most defensible pass in the realm. But that hardly seemed welcoming to others. Amid this flurry of correspondence, Daenerys oversaw the day-to-day governance of Dragonstone. Missandei kept her informed of trade vessels docking in the harbor, bringing goods from Essos and the north. Tyrion corresponded with the Crown's treasury in King's Landing, ensuring gold was allocated for repairs. Grey Worm quietly managed the Unsullied, rotating them between Dragonstone and King's Landing to maintain a stable presence in both locations. The men who remained in King's Landing oversaw the City Watch, gradually improving law and order in the war-scarred capital. Meanwhile, Somberion's continued growth became increasingly apparent. With each passing week, his wingspan widened, his chest grew more powerful, and his once juvenile roar took on a resonant bass that echoed off Dragonstone's volcanic cliffs. Daenerys took time each day to interact with him, sometimes guiding him in short flights over the island, sometimes simply resting a hand against his scales and murmuring words of encouragement in Valyrian. More than once, she caught Tyrion or Missandei gazing at the two of them with looks that mixed admiration and a hint of awe. One clear afternoon, after rereading a somewhat contentious letter from Lord Royce urging the Queen to pick a location soon, Daenerys decided she needed a reprieve from politics. She found Somberion perched at the edge of Dragonstone's main courtyard, snapping at the wind as if trying to bite the air. With a small smile, she approached him, ignoring the startled glances of guards who had grown used to the dragons but still kept their distance. Somberion turned his head, regarding her with luminous eyes. The black and gold of his hide gleamed in the sunlight, looking every bit the living tapestry of Valyrian legend. Daenerys placed a hand on his flank. "Shall we fly?" she murmured. He flicked his tail in response, a small rumbling purr vibrating through his throat. She stepped back, giving him room to lower his body so she could climb onto his back. He was not as large as Drogon. She had ridden Drogon countless times across battlefields, but Somberion was nearing the size Rhaegal and Viserion had been before reaching their adult mass. She needed to ensure he grew accustomed to carrying her weight. Carefully, she settled onto him, gripping the ridges along his neck. She had no formal saddle. This was a test flight of sorts, a chance for her to gauge how well he could handle both her balance and the wind. With a soft command in High Valyrian, she urged him upward. Somberion spread his wings, the membranes shimmering, and launched himself into the air. She felt her stomach drop at the sudden surge, but she held tight, letting the wind tear at her hair. The courtyard below blurred, and then they were above the battlements, above the stone spires, out over the sea. Exhilaration flooded her. She had flown many times on Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, but this was different. Somberion's movements were more agile, perhaps less predictable. She sensed his youthful vigor in every beat of his wings. He banked around a tower, sending gulls scattering, then soared out across the ocean. Daenerys glimpsed the rocky shore far below, waves crashing in white foam. The salt wind stung her cheeks. She let out a laugh, half delight, half thrill, as Somberion angled higher, cresting the thermals. She had nearly forgotten the sheer joy that came from flight unburdened by war. For a moment, it was just her and her dragon dancing upon the wind. They glided in a wide arc around Dragonstone, circling the fortress. She caught sight of workers on the docks, halting their tasks to stare at the small black shape overhead. More than a few pointed skyward. The watchman in one of the towers waved, and Daenerys found herself waving back, even though she doubted he could see the gesture clearly. Somberion roared, announcing his presence to the realm below, and Daenerys felt her heart surge. He was strong, proud, and, with every passing day, more confident in the skies that were his birthright. After several circuits, Daenerys guided him back toward the courtyard, though he displayed a playful reluctance, wanting to remain aloft. She patted his neck, promising more flights soon, then coaxed him into a downward spiral. Guards scrambled to clear a space, and with a rush of wind, Somberion landed in a swirl of dust and grit. Daenerys dismounted, heart-pounding. Somberion huffed, folding his wings neatly, and she offered him a piece of raw fish that a nearby handler nervously held out. He snapped it up, flicking his tail contentedly. Wiping sweat from her brow, Daenerys looked around at the circle of onlookers, unsullied, castle workers, even a few of Tyrion's clerks who had ventured outside to witness the short flight. She caught a glimpse of Tyrion himself emerging from a doorway, a mixture of amusement and faint exasperation on his face, as though he had just realized his queen had vanished on a dragon's whim. She gave him a shrug as if to say she needed the reprieve, and he rolled his eyes good-naturedly before returning inside. Yes, she thought, perhaps impulsive flights might not solve political dilemmas, but they reminded her of who she truly was, a Targaryen who bridged the mortal realm and the sky. In the days following that flight, Daenerys resumed her negotiations. The Grand Council matter came to a head when a flurry of replies arrived, each lord or lady offering a preference among the proposed sites. King's Landing received significant support, Harrenhal a vocal minority vote, and a handful of lords expressed interest in Riverrun to show neutrality. After consulting with Tyrion, Missandei, and Grey Worm, Daenerys made the decision final: King's Landing it would be. Despite its war-scarred state, it was still the capital, and she reasoned that hosting the council there would demonstrate her commitment to the city's revival. She would take precautions to ensure no faction arrived with overwhelming force. The City Watch and the Unsullied would keep the peace, while the presence of her dragons, at least Drogon and Somberion, would serve as both deterrent and reminder that she was prepared to protect her guests as well as maintain order. Word spread swiftly, and soon the roads leading to King's Landing buzzed with caravans ferrying noble delegates. Daenerys, meanwhile, prepared to sail from Dragonstone with a significant escort. She left behind a small garrison to protect the fortress, for though her rule faced no immediate challenge, one never knew when opportunists might seize upon a rumor that the queen was absent. Missandei traveled with her, naturally, and Tyrion too, though he grumbled about exchanging the quiet halls of Dragonstone for the noise and clamor of King's Landing. Grey Worm commanded a detachment of Unsullied, and at Daenerys' instruction he kept the force moderate. Enough to show strength, not so many as to appear to be occupying the city in a show of intimidation. The voyage across Blackwater Bay was brisk, the winds favorable. Somberion flew overhead for part of the journey, then occasionally settled on the deck of the lead ship to the wide-eyed astonishment of the sailors. He had grown accustomed to sea travel, it seemed, perhaps having watched Drogon so often. Daenerys stood at the prow, letting the spray kiss her cheeks. Each time she approached King's Landing, a knot formed in her stomach, remembering the day she had seized the city by force and left it in flames. Yet as the city's outline sharpened in the distance, she resolved not to let regret define her. She would walk into that battered capital as its queen, determined to rebuild what she had once broken. They arrived at dusk, the skyline tinted by the last rays of sunlight. The Red Keep rose above the city, though much of its outer walls still bore signs of the battle that had raged. Scaffolding crawled up the walls, evidence of ongoing repairs. Smoke from countless cookfires drifted skyward, mingling with the haze of a city that had never quite recovered from its near destruction. Yet there was motion, too, ships docked in the harbor, traders bustling in the markets, new houses erected where old ones had burned. Daenerys disembarked with Missandei, Tyrion, and Grey Worm at her side. Somberion circled overhead, then found a ledge near the bay to perch upon, mindful that Drogon was likely roosting somewhere near the Red Keep. A crowd of onlookers had gathered, half curious, half fearful, to witness the queen's arrival. She could see it in their eyes, memories, apprehension. But also a whisper of awe that she had come openly without torching their homes. The City Watch, clad in newly polished armor, formed a respectful corridor as Daenerys and her retinue passed. At their head was a young officer who bowed low. "Your Grace, welcome. We have prepared quarters for you in the Red Keep as well as accommodations for your advisors. The delegates are arriving daily." Daenerys inclined her head. "Thank you. Show us the way." They rode through the city streets. While signs of rebuilding were everywhere, the pace of progress clearly varied by district. Some areas thrummed with life, market stalls blooming with produce and wares. Others remained half-ruined, entire stretches of rubble only partly cleared. People halted in their tracks, gawking at the sight of their queen. Some knelt, others just stared, uncertain how to respond. Daenerys kept her gaze forward, trying not to betray the swirl of emotions within her. She recalled once walking these streets incognito, hearing the desperate pleas of smallfolk. She recalled the bells ringing, the final assault, the screams. Now she rode among them not as a conqueror, but as a ruler seeking to mend. It was a role that felt both redemptive and fraught. When they reached the Red Keep, she found the walls crawling with masons and carpenters reinforcing damaged ramparts. Inside, workers and servants hustled about, ensuring the keep was presentable for the gathering. Tyrion parted ways to coordinate lodging for arriving lords, while Missandei followed Daenerys into the throne room. Even this grand space bore the marks of conflict. A portion of the high ceiling had been rebuilt, fresh wood beams standing out against older stone architecture. The throne itself remained intact, the high seat of iron blades fused centuries ago by dragon fire. But the floor around it showed cracks. Staring at it, Daenerys felt echoes of the day she had seized that throne, the day she had imagined it marked her ultimate victory. She ascended the steps and placed a hand on the throne's cold metal. So many knives hammered into a single seat to symbolize the subjugation of countless enemies. Once she had believed that claiming this throne would fulfill her destiny. Now she saw that holding it meant more than dominion, it meant responsibility for every soul in the realm, from the mightiest lord to the poorest urchin. She lowered herself onto it, feeling the weight of history beneath her. "Your Grace," Missandei said softly, stepping forward. Shall I summon the stewards to ensure your personal chambers are prepared? Daenerys nodded, pulling her gaze from the spiked metal around her. Yes, and find out how many lords have already arrived and where they've been housed. We'll need to schedule formal introductions soon. Missandei departed to carry out her tasks, and Daenerys remained on the throne a moment longer, gazing across the wide chamber. It was not the conquering queen who sat there now, but the woman who had seen the horrors unleashed when a Targaryen lost control. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. Her dragons were not the only ones who needed taming. The realm's fear, her own past, the fragile alliances, she had to keep them all in balance. That evening, she settled into refurbished royal quarters. They were smaller and less ostentatious than the ones Cersei Lannister once occupied by Daenerys' own request. She had no desire for the same trappings of power that her enemies had relished. After dining lightly and reviewing a stack of messages with Tyrion, she stepped onto a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. Fires glinted along the shoreline, and the city hummed with a million small lives carrying on despite tragedy. Somberion was perched on a ruined tower near the outer walls, while farther off she could see the hulking shape of Drogon silhouetted against the moonlight. Occasionally they roared to each other, a deep-bellied resonance that made the city stir uneasily. Yet no panic ensued. The people were learning that the dragons would not wreak havoc unprovoked. In the coming days, more lords arrived. The courtyard bustled with the sigils of the North, the Vale, the Westerlands, the Reach, the Stormlands, and Dorne. Daenerys greeted each delegation with measured courtesy, aware that many had never set foot in King's Landing since the war. Some carried lingering distrust, especially those from houses that had suffered under Targaryen or Lannister rule. Others came with relief, hoping to see a stable realm at last. She noticed certain delegates eyeing the newly erected scaffolding around various wings of the Red Keep. Some whispered about the city's half-repaired state. Others eyed the scorched patches of stone on the ramparts, reminders of Drogon's fury. Yet as Daenerys presided over initial receptions in the throne room, she remained poised, answering questions about the city's rebuilding efforts and the measures taken to feed thousands of displaced residents. She explained how trade routes were opening between the Crownlands and other regions, how she had taxed shipping in a way that financed reconstruction without crushing commerce. Tyrion stood at her side, offering nuanced details when lords inquired about treasury matters. Grey Worm and the Unsullied, positioned discreetly, served as a silent reminder that order would be maintained. One morning, as Daenerys finished hearing a petition from a lesser lord of the Westerlands concerning stolen livestock, Missandei approached with a note. "Your Grace, Lady Sansa Stark has arrived outside the city gates. She travels with a small retinue. She requests an audience." Daenerys felt a curious mixture of anticipation and mild unease. She and Sansa had forged a tentative respect after the war against the dead, but their relationship had been strained by revelations of Jon's parentage and by the subsequent tensions. Still, Sansa had proven willing to cooperate in recent months, and her letters had been supportive of Daenerys' conciliatory approach. Daenerys rose from the throne, motioning for Tyrion and Missandei to follow. They went to meet Sansa near the main gate, accompanied by a handful of knights for formality. The North's banner, a gray dire wolf on a white field, fluttered in the breeze above a small caravan. Sansa emerged, her auburn hair bound in a simple style, wearing a pale gray cloak lined with wolf fur. She looked regal but not ostentatious, her expression poised. Daenerys inclined her head respectfully. "Lady Stark, welcome to King's Landing." Sansa inclined her own head in return, a faint smile touching her lips. "Queen Daenerys, thank you for your hospitality." She glanced at Tyrion, giving him a polite nod. "Lord Hand." Tyrion bowed. "Lady Stark, I trust your journey was uneventful." "Thankfully, yes," Sansa replied. "The roads are in better shape than they were a year ago." Daenerys gestured toward the city. "I have rooms prepared for you in the Red Keep. The Grand Council will begin in a few days, once everyone has arrived and settled. In the meantime, if you have any pressing concerns, my door is open." Sansa's smile remained polite, her eyes flickering with an undercurrent of caution. "I appreciate it, Your Grace. The North is faring better, though the scars of war remain. I hope this council proves fruitful so we do not return to conflict." Daenerys could hear the unspoken layers in that statement. The North remained watchful, uncertain if the Targaryen queen's new approach would truly hold. She nodded. "So do I." As Sansa's party moved inside, Daenerys walked with her, making small conversation about the route she had taken, the state of winter crops in the north, and the possible expansions of trade in furs and timber. Sansa maintained a cool but cordial demeanor, offering measured responses. Daenerys recognized a quiet steel in her bearing, an assurance that the North would no longer bow blindly to foreign rulers. Yet there was no overt hostility. Perhaps their previous tensions had softened into a mutual determination to avoid another war that neither region wanted. That afternoon, Sansa joined Daenerys in a smaller solar for tea, accompanied only by Missandei for formality's sake. They spoke with more candor, reflecting on the wars they had survived. Sansa recounted the challenges of restoring order in the North, the dilemmas of feeding remote holdfasts, and the pride she felt in seeing women step into leadership roles after so many men had died in battles. Daenerys, in turn, described her efforts to quell unrest in the Crownlands and assist war-torn regions like the Riverlands, forging alliances not through fear but through tangible aid. For a time, they found common ground in the shared struggle of governance. Eventually, the conversation drifted to more personal matters. Sansa hesitated, then broached the topic of Jon Snow. She explained that Jon remained in the deep north, beyond the wall, though he occasionally sent ravens describing the rebuilding of the Night's Watch, the search for scattered free-folk communities, and the peace they found in those cold expanses. Daenerys listened in silence, recalling the turmoil that had once bound her to Jon, the mixture of love and heartbreak and betrayal that had followed. She asked no questions, merely nodding at intervals. Sansa seemed to sense that the subject was fraught, and after offering a few details, she let it drop. That evening, Daenerys stood upon a high balcony overlooking the Red Keep's inner courtyard. Flames from torches below lit the paved squares where various lords and ladies strolled, exchanging cautious pleasantries. It was a tapestry of heraldry, stags of Baratheon, sunspears of Dorne, falcons of Arryn, dire wolves of Stark, roses of Tyrell, now represented by a caretaker family in Highgarden, krakens of the Iron Islands, one of the surviving branches loyal to Yara Greyjoy. Each carried their own ambitions and fears, yet here they were, gathered under Daenerys' invitation, lured by the hope that a single meeting might prevent further strife. Somberion's roar echoed above, and Daenerys glimpsed him skimming the highest tower. Near him, Drogon circled, larger and darker, a shadow against the moon. Some delegates gawked upward, no doubt unnerved by the sight of not just one or two, but 4 living dragons that occasionally took to the skies at varying times. Rhaegal and Viserion alternated their flights, content to roost during the council's quiet hours. The city had learned to live with the dragons, though their presence remained a source of endless rumor and speculation. Early the next morning, Daenerys convened an informal gathering in the throne room, asking each region's representatives to introduce themselves, confirm their purpose, and voice any immediate concerns. It was not yet the Grand Council, merely a prelude, a chance to gauge dispositions. The Vale's delegates, Lady Waynwood and Lord Royce, spoke of the Aerys' security and the desire for a stable monarchy that would not drag them into further wars. The Westerlands, represented by a distant cousin of the Lannisters since the main line had died or disappeared, humbly requested assistance in rebuilding certain mines that had collapsed. The Reach was led by Lord Tarly, who, after much controversy, had reclaimed some measure of leadership from the remnants of House Tyrell with the Crown's blessing. He promised ample grain shipments if the Crown continued to guarantee safe passage along the Mander. Yara Greyjoy arrived shortly afterward, a quirk of a smile on her lips as she remarked that the Iron Islands were relatively quiet now, though she hinted that certain ambitious captains might test the Queen's patience if the monarchy appeared weak. Dorne's envoy, a tall woman with golden eyes, spoke politely of renewing old treaties of trade in spices, wines, and precious metals. Sansa Stark, representing the North, relayed that the northern roads remained in need of repair, but that she had brought thick pelts and salted fish as tokens of cooperation, distributing them among the delegates. The Stormlands, represented by Gendry Baratheon, were eager to see the unoccupied farmland around King's Landing cultivated again, promising manpower and seeds if the Crown would make the land grants official. Through all these exchanges, Daenerys listened attentively, responding with either gratitude or reassurance. Tyrion chimed in at intervals with specifics regarding the Crown's treasury, likely yields, or potential solutions. Daenerys sensed a cautious optimism among the group, an awareness that war had ravaged Westeros too long and that perhaps it was time to build anew. Yet tension simmered beneath the surface. Some delegates clearly eyed each other with old grudges in mind. Others cast suspicious glances at the Queen or at the mention of dragons. Daenerys remained measured, refusing to let any moment devolve into hostility. After hours of these preliminary discussions, Daenerys announced a recess. The formal session of the Grand Council would begin in 3 days, giving time for stragglers to arrive and for each delegation to gather any final proposals. She invited them to explore the city, see the progress of reconstruction, and join a welcoming feast she planned for the following night in the Red Keep's courtyard. Her hope was that the relaxed setting of a feast, accompanied by music and dance, would break down some barriers before the heavy negotiations began. That evening, Tyrion, Sansa, Gendry, and Lady Waynwood joined Daenerys in a small courtyard garden to discuss subtle alliances. The garden, once a site of ruin, had been replanted with hardy flowers and shrubs that Daenerys brought in from Dragonstone. Braziers cast a warm glow among the greenery. The conversation touched on the differences in each region's needs. Sansa highlighted how the North's climate required more robust trade routes for staples like grain, while Gendry's Stormlands needed better roads to connect them with inland markets. Lady Waynwood expressed concern about any re-emergence of chaos in King's Landing that might spill into the Vale. Daenerys nodded, acknowledging each point. She saw in Sansa's eyes a mixture of skepticism and reluctant admiration, in Gendry's eyes a straightforward desire to fix problems without the entanglements of politics, in Lady Waynwood's a prudent wariness that came from witnessing too many changes in the monarchy. Sometime after midnight, Daenerys withdrew to her quarters, mind buzzing with the interplay of alliances. She penned a few notes for her own reference, reminding herself to address certain lords individually, to reaffirm trade deals with Dorne and the Reach, to quell persistent rumors that she might allow the Faith Militant to rise again unchecked. As she put down her quill, she heard a thunderous roar from the skies. She stepped onto her balcony and saw Drogon launching himself from a turret, swooping toward the city walls. Moments later, Somberion answered with his own roar, ascending to join Drogon. She watched them circle together, a vision of black wings in the moonlight. They soared low over the city, likely scanning for anything amiss, then drifted back to roost near the keep. The sight filled Daenerys with a strange reassurance. Though the realm might be riddled with fear and doubt, her dragons were there, constant and magnificent. And they were not unleashing destruction, but rather embodying a silent guardianship. When the day of the welcoming feast arrived, the Red Keep's courtyard transformed into a bustle of color and sound. Lanterns hung from poles, casting soft light across tables laden with roasted meats, fresh loaves of bread, fruits, and flagons of wine and ale. Musicians tuned their lutes and fiddles, preparing to play ballads of old heroes and new beginnings. Servants hurried about, ensuring no cup remained empty. It was a stark contrast to the city's battered memory of war, a deliberate statement that life could go on, that the realm could celebrate rather than cower in the face of dragons. Daenerys entered wearing a gown that combined Targaryen black with subtle gold embroidery, echoing Somberion's colors. She walked among the lords and ladies, exchanging greetings, carefully navigating the swirl of conversation. Sansa wore a warm gray dress lined with wolf fur, while Gendry stuck to simpler Baratheon attire. Yara Greyjoy donned breeches rather than a gown, a sword belted at her hip, her handshake firm. Lady Waynwood commented on the pleasantness of the mild southern evening compared to the chill mountain nights of the Vale. A Dornish noblewoman praised the honeyed wine, offering Daenerys a bottle of Dorne's finest vintage for her personal collection. As the feast progressed, music began to play in earnest. Some courtiers took to dancing in the courtyard's open space. The mood grew lighter, wine loosening tongues. Laughter drifted across the tables, and Daenerys observed old adversaries making awkward attempts at civility. She glimpsed Tyrion engaged in lively banter with a row of lesser knights, no doubt spinning a tale that drew half-disbelieving chuckles. She saw Missandei graciously guiding a conversation between two minor lords from the Crownlands and the Reach who had once fought on opposite sides. Every small step toward civility was a victory, however fragile. Still, Daenerys kept an eye out for potential sparks of trouble. She caught a moment of tension when a Westerland's knight made a careless remark about the North's wild ways, causing a northern bannerman to bristle. She intervened smoothly, steering the conversation to the new roads the North was building. The moment passed without confrontation. She noticed Sansa doing something similar across the courtyard. The Lady of Winterfell defused a tense exchange between a Vale Lord and a Riverlands knight, redirecting them to common ground about border security. If small acts of diplomacy continued like this, perhaps open conflict could be avoided. Near midnight, the music changed to a slower tune, and the crowd began to settle or break into smaller groups. Daenerys took a seat at a table under a flowering trellis, where Tyrion, Sansa, Gendry, and a few others joined her. They shared stories of the realm's past, drinking in moderation. Daenerys sipped a sweet wine, feeling the day's tension melt into a soft warmth. At one point, she asked Sansa how the North perceived the new Targaryen rule. Sansa paused, glancing at the others, then answered in a measured tone. They saw it as an uncertain blessing. Daenerys' presence had helped unify them against the dead, but the scars of northern independence still ran deep. Yet Sansa admitted that, so far, Daenerys had shown restraint and a willingness to govern fairly. If that continued, the North would not spurn the crown. Daenerys listened, absorbing both the encouragement and the caution. She responded with gratitude, acknowledging that winning trust took time. Gendry nodded along, remarking that the Stormlands felt similarly, proud, cautious, but ready to accept a queen who did not force them to kneel at Dragonfire's edge. Tyrion raised his cup, toasting a future without another war of succession. Sansa joined in, though a flicker of wariness remained in her gaze. By the feast's end, Daenerys felt buoyed by the sense that the realm truly might stand on the cusp of a new dawn. She excused herself to retire, weaving through the crowd with Missandei at her side. On her way out, she passed Yara Greyjoy, who gave her a half-smile. "Quite the gathering," Yara said, gesturing with a cup of ale. "Not long ago, half these lords would have happily gutted each other. You've done well to bring them here." Daenerys inclined her head. "There's still much to mend." Yara nodded. "There is. But you've proven to me that you'd rather see the realm rebuilt than burned. I owe you that respect, at least. Good night, Your Grace." Daenerys watched Yara depart, recalling how they had once made alliances for the Iron Islands' independence under the Targaryen banner. She saw in Yara's posture a certain relief, as though she too was weary of perpetual conflict. Then Daenerys retired for the night, resolved to carry this momentum into the formal sessions of the Grand Council. The next day dawned with brisk air. A hush fell over King's Landing as the city braced for what might become a defining moment in its history. In the Red Keep's Great Hall, seating was arranged in rows, each section designated for a region. The throne overlooked it all, but Daenerys planned to stand at the forefront, not overshadowing the assembly by looming on the Iron Throne. Her dragons remained outside, though Drogon perched on a broken tower that offered a partial view of the courtyard, and Somberion patrolled the skies, an occasional roar echoing in the rafters. Delegates filled the hall, their varied colors blending into a tapestry of Westeros's heraldry. When all were seated, Daenerys entered with Tyrion, Missandei, Grey Worm, and Sansa. A hush fell as she stood before them, meeting their eyes. She could sense the weight of their expectations. She began with a simple address, her voice carrying across the hall. She thanked them for coming, acknowledged the hardships they had endured, and expressed her hope that these talks would prevent future wars. She emphasized that each region's unique needs deserved a hearing, and that her role was not to dictate but to guide them toward consensus wherever possible. As she spoke, some delegates nodded gravely, others exchanged guarded glances, but no one jeered. That alone felt like progress. Then Tyrion outlined the day's agenda, explaining how they would address pressing concerns, the reconstruction of roads and infrastructure, trade agreements among the regions, a standardized coinage to facilitate commerce, and the matter of how best to integrate the North's partial autonomy while keeping it within the Crown's broader framework. Sansa delivered a clear statement of her region's stance. The North would remain loyal, provided their traditions were respected and their resources not exploited. Lord Tarly for the Reach proposed a system of rotating relief efforts to ensure no single region bore the brunt of supporting another. The Vale delegates requested a reaffirmation of certain ancient charters that guaranteed their independence of local governance. Dorne demanded that the Crown not interfere in their inheritance laws, which had often run differently from the rest of Westeros. As each region spoke, Daenerys listened, occasionally interjecting with her own questions or proposals. Tyrion moderated the flow of discussion, ensuring no one voice dominated. Missandei recorded everything meticulously, preparing a formal record. Now and then delegates voiced concerns that touched on the memory of Targaryen power, how to ensure the dragons remained protectors, not threats. Daenerys answered with calm assurance, reminding them that she had not once unleashed her dragons on a rebellious holdfast since the last war. It was a tenuous promise, but so far unbroken. Debate raged hottest around the question of a uniform code of law. Some lords insisted each region keep its own laws intact, others argued for a unified system to prevent confusion and exploitation. While this might seem mundane, it revealed deeper tensions. The Iron Islands had long practiced raiding as tradition. The North had a different set of customs, including trial by the old gods in some cases. Dorne's inheritance often allowed women to inherit equally. Daenerys wanted to encourage more progressive policies but feared pushing too hard would spark defiance. They resolved to form a special council of maesters and local justiciars to draft proposals that each region could evaluate, aiming for incremental harmonization rather than immediate upheaval. On and on, the discussion stretched. Daenerys maintained a patient facade, though exhaustion prickled at her. She recalled commanding armies across continents, forging alliances in the heat of battle. Yet this layered negotiation felt every bit as grueling. Still, she sensed that it was the only true path to a stable realm. At midday, they broke for a brief meal. Daenerys retreated to a smaller chamber to gather herself, sipping water as Tyrion and Missandei offered quick updates. Sansa joined them, looking equally drained. She gave Daenerys a small, rueful smile. Politics can be more tiresome than war. Daenerys returned the smile. True, but if it prevents war, I'm willing to endure it. By late afternoon, they reconvened. The pace of negotiations slowed somewhat, but they managed to finalize several minor accords, agreements to coordinate road repairs, a loose commitment to unify coin weights, and a promise by each region to exchange small retinues of knights for cross-training. Hoping to build camaraderie, Daenerys noted that while some lords grumbled, no one outright refused. Incremental progress, she thought. She also noticed that many delegates glimpsed Somberion's shadow through the windows, occasionally glancing upward with both awe and trepidation. Perhaps the silent reminder of Targaryen might keep the more fractious elements in line. When the first day's session ended, Daenerys gave a short closing statement, thanking them for their diligence and urging them to rest before the next day's talks. She saw relief mingling with fatigue on their faces. Some delegates approached one another in private clusters, continuing whispered discussions. Others left swiftly, shoulders bowed. She watched Sansa speak quietly with Gendry, likely about some northern Stormlands synergy. Tyrion cornered a pair of Vale lords, doubtless applying his clever tongue to secure agreements on certain trade routes. Daenerys took a moment to stand near the Iron Throne, eyeing the swirl of color and movement. This was the realm she had once sought to rule by conquest. Now she ruled it by discourse, persuasion, and measured threat. She felt no regret for this new approach, only relief that perhaps the day of endless battles was over. That night, as she sat in her chamber, Missandei brought her a fresh pot of tea to soothe her throat. You spoke all day, Your Grace. You must be exhausted. Daenerys accepted the tea gratefully. I am, but it's a good sort of tired. She sipped, letting the warmth spread through her. The delicate aroma reminded her of simpler times in Essos, though those days had brought their own perils. How did you find the Lord's reactions? Missandei settled into a seat across from her, folding her hands in her lap. Most seemed earnest about avoiding further wars. A few were undoubtedly hedging their bets, waiting to see if you falter. But no one challenged you openly. They recognize your power and your restraint. Daenerys nodded, gazing at the tea's pale surface. Restraint. That was the key? Every day, she walked the line between demonstrating enough strength to keep the peace and refraining from the fire and blood impulses that had once consumed her. As long as she showed the realm that a Targaryen could rule justly, they might come to accept her dragons not as a harbinger of doom, but as guardians. The memory of King's Landing in flames haunted her, but it also spurred her to prove that such a tragedy would never happen again under her reign. Another day of council meetings loomed, this time focusing on the shape of the crown's relationship with the North, the Vale, and Dorne's specific concerns about inheritance and autonomy. Daenerys braced herself for lengthy disputes, but felt heartened by the small victories of the day. She resolved to keep pressing for unity, for a realm that could stand firm against any future threats, be they mortal or otherwise. That morning, the delegates reconvened under the same vaulted ceiling. The discussion began with Sansa outlining the North's stance. They sought certain liberties regarding their law enforcement and wanted to ensure that no southern armies would be quartered in the North without invitation. Daenerys listened, acknowledging the North's unique climate and challenges. She offered a compromise. The crown would not place permanent southern garrisons in the North, but in times of crisis, the North would accept crown forces as allies, not occupiers. Sansa agreed, seeing the sense in it. They formalized it in writing, to the relief of both sides. Lord Royce then insisted that the Vale's mountaintop strongholds remain free from crown taxation beyond a minimal tribute, citing the difficulty of trade routes. Tyrion proposed a scaled tax based on accessibility, ensuring that remote regions weren't overburdened but still contributed. After some grumbling, they reached a tentative agreement. Dorne's envoy pressed for equal inheritance laws for daughters, a matter that caused some lords to squirm. Daenerys, remembering her own struggles as a woman claiming the throne, sympathized. She spoke firmly in favor of allowing each region to adopt such laws if they chose, but would not force them realm-wide without broader consensus. The envoy accepted that for now, though she hinted that Dorne might push for more uniform equality in future councils. Daenerys privately admired that. Change could come in steps as long as the door remained open. By midday, the temperature in the hall rose, not just from bodies packed together but from the friction of debate. Grey Worms stood watch from a side passage, silent and vigilant, while Missandei's quill scratched incessantly on parchment. Occasionally, delegates fanned themselves or drank from clay pitchers of water, but they pressed on. Despite the discomfort, no shouting matches erupted, though a few spats flared before being calmed by Daenerys or Tyrion's quick interjections. Late in the afternoon, the discussion turned to a matter none had expected to revisit so soon: the faith of the Seven. A group of pious lords from the Reach and the Crownlands timidly broached the subject of re-establishing the faith militant, claiming it could serve as a moral bulwark. Immediately, dissent crackled. Many remembered the terror unleashed by extremist zealots in King's Landing. Sansa's stance was that the North did not follow the Seven, so they refused to support a religious army. Yara Greyjoy scoffed at the notion entirely, reminding everyone that the Iron Islands worshipped the drowned god. Dorne's envoy was likewise unenthusiastic, citing Lawler worship among some of its population as well as its own cultural traditions. Daenerys felt her pulse quicken. The faith militant had been disbanded by the Targaryens centuries ago, and the more recent attempt to re-establish them under the High Sparrow had ended in catastrophe. She recalled how that fanaticism had ensnared King's Landing, leading to more bloodshed and tyranny. Carefully, she stated that while the faith of the Seven was free to worship, any militarization of religion would require extremely strict oversight if it were permitted at all. Tyrion backed her up, pointing out that the realm was a mosaic of faiths. The debate simmered, with the pious lords quietly fuming that the monarchy would not embrace the faith militant. But no consensus supported them, and they eventually relented. By the time the second day ended, exhaustion weighed on everyone. They had tackled a range of issues that might once have caused armies to march. Now, though tensions rose, compromise had been found more often than not. Daenerys dismissed the assembly, encouraging them to rest and gather again the next day to formalize the agreements reached thus far. She watched them file out, some with frustration, others with weary relief. Somberion roared from beyond the walls, a long, echoing cry that seemed to declare the day's end. Daenerys exhaled, feeling a sense of guarded triumph. They were truly shaping a new order, imperfect, but better than endless war. That night, she walked alone through the Red Keep's corridors, flanked by only 2 unsullied guards. Memories tugged at her. She passed by the spot where Cersei once stood, defiantly awaiting Daenerys' siege. She recalled the courtyard where the mountain had loomed as a silent terror. Now those ghosts were gone, replaced by the hum of stonemasons and the swirl of foreign banners. She stepped outside onto a rampart overlooking the city. King's Landing sprawled before her, a patchwork of new dwellings and old ruins, the river glinting under moonlight. Far off, she saw the faint silhouette of a dragon perched on the city walls, likely Viserion or Regal, out for a nocturnal vigil. Somberion and Drogon might be roosting on the keep's higher towers. Their presence, once so terrifying, now served as a silent sign of stability, at least for the moment. She closed her eyes, inhaling the cool night air. The realm was still fragile. Countless grudges lingered. But if this Grand Council succeeded, if they enshrined mutual respect and purposeful cooperation, then perhaps Westeros would not splinter the moment a new threat arose. She thought of the long night, of an enemy that could not be reasoned with. If such horrors ever threatened again, they needed a realm united not just by a crowned figure, but by a shared purpose. In that quiet moment, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Sansa approaching, cloak drawn tight against the breeze. The Lady of Winterfell paused, meeting Daenerys' gaze with a slight nod. "A lovely view," Sansa said, stepping up beside her. Different from Winterfell, but no less grand in its own way. Daenerys offered a small smile. "Yes. The city always felt massive, yet so vulnerable. I suppose that's true of the realm as a whole." Sansa's expression was thoughtful. "You've done well these past days, guiding all these lords without letting them tear each other apart. They might never fully trust a Targaryen, but they're starting to trust you." Daenerys regarded her carefully. "And you, Lady Stark? Do you trust me?" Sansa's lips twitched in the ghost of a smile. "I trust that you want to do better than those before you. I see it in the effort you make to resolve these disputes. That's more than I could say in the early days when we were both consumed by our own wariness." Daenerys inclined her head, accepting the words. "Thank you for that honesty." They stood side by side, gazing at the city lights. The silence that followed was not entirely comfortable, but it held a measure of mutual respect. When Sansa eventually bade her good night, Daenerys felt a subtle weight lift. Perhaps the North would not be her most ardent supporter, but neither would they undermine her so long as she upheld her promises. For now, that was enough. The Grand Council's final day dawned bright and clear, a crispness to the air that suggested autumn was edging closer. Delegates filed into the great hall with mingled hope and fatigue shed on their faces. They took their seats for what all believed would be a culminating session. Daenerys, clad in Targaryen black and gold, stood at the head, scanning the room. Tyrion stood to her left, Missandei to her right. Grey Worm and the Unsullied lined the perimeter, ensuring order. The day began with formalizing the various accords hammered out in previous sessions, a cooperative approach to road building, a partial standardization of coinage, the reaffirmation of each region's right to local governance under the Crown's overarching protection, and the mutual defense clause that no single region could secede or wage war on another without being branded a traitor. Daenerys listened to each vow, each pledge, and felt both relief and a quiet sense of history being forged before her eyes. A final point arose: succession. Some lords insisted that if Daenerys had no direct heirs, the realm needed clarity on who might inherit the throne. The question prickled at Daenerys. Her lineage was complicated, and though there were rumors she could still bear children, that remained uncertain since the magic that had once been cast upon her. She took a breath, stating that in the event of her inability to produce an heir, she would call another Grand Council to decide the next monarch. This caused a ripple of murmurs, but it also reassured many that she did not intend to leave the realm in chaos. She would, when the time came, ensure an orderly succession by adopting an heir if needed, or by letting the lords of Westeros determine it together. A measured calm settled, none pressed the matter too forcefully. By mid-afternoon, it was done. Daenerys invited each delegation to step forward and seal the agreements with a solemn oath. Lords and ladies rose in turn, speaking their house words or personal vows to uphold the newly minted accords. Tyrion oversaw the signing of documents, while Missandei prepared duplicates for each region. Daenerys stood, quietly proud, as the final signature dried. The Seven Kingdoms, albeit with some differences, had, for the first time in living memory, convened to chart a future of cooperation rather than conquest. Applause broke out, halting and scattered at first, then growing. Some delegates embraced, others merely offered stiff nods. The tension in the air deflated, replaced by cautious optimism. Daenerys recognized that these written agreements might not hold forever, that ambition and greed could still unravel them. But the fact that they had gathered here in King's Landing, forging unity without war, was a step beyond what she might have imagined mere years ago. She lifted a hand and silence fell. "You have made a choice for peace," she said, her voice clear. "We have come far since the wars that nearly broke us. We stand today not as enemies, but as stewards of a realm that deserves our best. I swear to you that so long as I hold this throne, I will honor the accords we have forged. I will not let Westeros slip back into the darkness of endless bloodshed. And if ever there comes a foe that threatens us all, we will stand together as we did against the dead." Another round of applause, gentler this time, moved through the hall. Some delegates looked genuinely heartened. Others seemed simply relieved it was over. Daenerys lowered her hand, letting the chamber settle, and she realized that tears threatened to prick her eyes. She blinked them away. She had not expected a triumphant victory, only the slow labor of healing. And in that moment, she felt more like a mother to the realm than the mother of dragons, though her dragons, indeed, had played their part by maintaining an undercurrent of awe that tempered men's worst impulses. The assembly dispersed, delegates gathering their effects, making plans to depart in the coming days. Many approached Daenerys to offer respectful bows, to say they looked forward to continued cooperation. She returned their gestures with gratitude, aware that trust could not be commanded. It had to be earned, moment by moment. Tyrion murmured congratulations, while Missandei quietly glowed with pride. Sansa dipped her head, a faint smile on her lips, then joined her northern retinue to plan their journey home. Gendry gave Daenerys a hearty handshake, promising to return to the Stormlands and put these new alliances into practice. Lady Waynwood and Lord Royce left with a sense of relief, remarking that the Vale's isolationist days might shift subtly now. When at last the great hall emptied, Daenerys stood among scattered chairs and half-burned torches, the echoes of the day's session lingering. She found herself exhaling a long, trembling breath. It was done. The first Grand Council of her reign had not ended in violence or betrayal, but in agreements hammered out through words. She stepped forward, running her palm over the surface of the great table where so many had signed their names. The significance of the moment settled on her. She hoped that, in time, history would record this council as the start of a new era in Westeros, a departure from the cycles of vendetta and strife. Tyrion approached, a rare sincerity in his tone. "That was well done, Your Grace. I believe we may have just changed the course of the Seven Kingdoms, though the real work begins now, as each region implements these accords." Daenerys nodded. "Agreed, but at least we have a foundation to build upon." She paused, thinking of the shape of her destiny. "It seems that dragons can do more than conquer. They can protect if guided well." Tyrion smirked slightly. "You've always said dragons are not slaves. You've proven they needn't be instruments of destruction either." She smiled back, a wave of relief washing over her. "Yes, perhaps that's the greatest victory of all." They departed the hall together, the echoes of that day's negotiations resonating in Daenerys's mind. Outside, in the Red Keep's courtyard, the sun slanted low, bathing the ancient stones in a warm glow. A gentle breeze carried the scent of the sea. Somberion waited on a high parapet, gazing down at her with those bright, curious eyes. She felt his presence like a promise. She had hatched him in secret, nurtured him in darkness, and now he soared openly, a symbol of power wielded with conscience rather than cruelty. The realm beheld him and did not cower. She took it as a sign that her own transformation, from breaker of chains to true unifier, was possible. As she walked across the courtyard, pausing to exchange farewells with a pair of Dornish envoys, she heard the beating of mighty wings. She turned to see Drogon descending from above, stirring the dust in the courtyard as he landed with a thunderous impact. The delegates nearby recoiled, but Daenerys merely raised a hand, approaching her largest child with steady steps. Drogon lowered his head, allowing her to run her fingers along his snout. Then, in a swirl of wings, Rhaegal and Viserion also took flight overhead, their roars echoing in chorus. Somberion answered from his perch, spreading his wings in a show of camaraderie. The courtyard fell silent as men and women from every corner of Westeros lifted their eyes to witness four dragons sharing the sky. Daenerys stood at the center of it all, letting the wind from their wings wash over her. This was not the fearsome arrival of a conqueror. It was a display of majesty tempered by the day's spirit of cooperation. She glanced around at the watchers and saw more awe than terror, more wonder than dread. It was only a glimpse, a fleeting moment. But in that moment, Daenerys believed that the realm, scarred as it was, might one day embrace the dragons as an emblem of unity rather than a threat. Tyrion stopped beside her, half his face lit by the sunlight glinting off Drogon's scales. He spoke quietly, almost in reverence. "If someone had told me years ago that I'd see not one, but 4 dragons in the sky over a peaceful Westeros, I'd have suggested they lay off the Dornish wine." Daenerys let out a soft laugh, eyes never leaving her dragons. "Yet here we are. Let's hope it remains this way." And so, as the delegates gazed upward, for dragons circled the Red Keep in leisurely arcs, Daenerys Targaryen, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, felt a surge of quiet triumph. The Grand Council had concluded, forging alliances through words instead of steel. Though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, she had taken a decisive step in proving that her reign would not mirror the worst of her ancestors. She had revealed the 4th dragon and, in time, made him part of a broader tapestry of peace. Somberion roared again, a bright and clarion sound, and Daenerys felt it resonate in her own chest. She stood resolute, determined that as long as she lived, this fragile unity would be nurtured, grown, and defended. For the first time since she had set foot on Westerosi shores, she truly believed that fire could be a beacon as well as a blade, and that the realm, unified by choice rather than fear, could withstand even the darkest storms the future might bring.